going to begin this unit with the circulatory system. It is really important to understand the circulatory system because this system does so much for all the other systems in our body. Without this system, everything else would shut down. This is a technique that was done by a scientist. His name is Gunther von Hagen. If you've ever seen those like Body Worlds or Body Works exhibits where there's like the different kind of like dissections of humans, one of the techniques that he has figured out was that he could digest away all of the other materials in the body except for the circulatory vessels. So here's what's left in the head. And I think this really hits the point home that our circulatory system is in contact with every single cell in your body. Look at the shape of the nose, even the lips. You have blood vessels in contact with every single cell in your body. That's pretty amazing. It spider webs all the way throughout everywhere. And why this is important, because it's kind of like a mail system, that it is going to drop off important things and it's going to pick up important things. It's going to move those things around the body. So all of the activities, the metabolic activities that the cells do, they are giving off things that they don't need, or they're sending out things that they made, and those things are going to be delivered somewhere else in the body to cause a chain reaction of events. So here, you can also see that there's bigger blood vessels, like this, for example. And then there's kind of medium blood vessels. And then when we get to where you just see a mass of, you can't really tell what's going on, those are the really teeny blood vessels.
Is the big one the carotid?
Yeah. The carotid artery, right, correct. Goes up into the head. Good, nice. So, what does all of this do? One is that body cells need nutrients. We'll get into the difference between like nutrients and energy toward the end of the semester, but just so you know, is that anything in terms of like, let's say carbohydrates or fats or proteins, they are made up of two parts. They're made up of energy, which is found in bonds, and then they're made up of nutrients, which are the atoms, the carbons, the hydrogens, the nitrogens, etc. And they are not interchangeable. They work together as a whole. So nutrients are things that are going to help to build up our cell materials. Carbons, the hydrogens, the nitrogens are going to help to build what the cellular machinery needs. Nutrients, if we're just thinking about nutrients, nutrients are any of the substances in our body, again, the carbons, the hydrogens, the nitrogens, the oxygens, the phosphorus, etc. Those nutrients can be, like I said, good things, and they could be bad things like waste, for example. So while our body has these whole systems, I always think it's just outstanding, like unbelievable, that each cell has kind of almost like a body, where they have organelles, right? Organs, we think about the organs that make up our body, and they do all these very important things. The cells are kind of like mini microscopic bodies that have systems like our overall systems. And what our overall systems are doing, a lot of that's happening at the microscopic level of the cells. And so they are making waste products as they break stuff down. They are using the nutrients and the energy that's delivered to have metabolic functions and pathways within them. So there's so much complexity, not only at the whole like body system, but all the way down to the actual cells themselves. So what substances are transmitted around the body? So nutrients like oxygen and carbon dioxide, and then nutrients and bonds between those nutrients to make our energy sources, carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, hormones. We talked about plants had hormones to do some things in their bodies. We have hormones too that are delivered throughout, and we'll talk about more in the next unit about how some of these hormones will be released and then they go through the blood and it stimulates something else, another tissue or an organ to do something, go through a metabolic pathway to make something and then release that product, and then that product goes throughout the circulatory system and it contacts something else and it stimulates that to undergo some metabolic pathway where it produces something and then that goes through the blood and it contacts something else. And we have these chains of events that happen because of our hormones, and our hormones regulate a lot of saying from one organ, tissue, or gland, hey, you do this and make this. Oh, now that you've made this, do this and make that. And this all gets transmitted throughout the circulatory system. And then, of course, as anything is kind of like those metabolic pathways, as a result of those metabolic pathways, we have waste products. And you can think about that very simply in terms of our respiratory system, that we breathe in oxygen, a useful nutrient, and that useful nutrient, we talked a little bit about this, is that stimulates this whole process of cellular respiration. And the point of cellular respiration, which we'll talk about when we talk about the respiratory system, is the act of breathing this in at the cellular level, which carries that oxygen to our cells, stimulates our cells to undergo a metabolic pathway of cellular respiration to break down our energy sources that are important to us, and as a result, build up machinery, help our blood to flow, help our organs to function appropriately, help our hormones to be made and then transmit through our body, transport throughout. And as a result, then you get waste products like carbon dioxide is a waste product. And so that act of breathing, it stimulates so many important things throughout your entire body to happen. And so I know oftentimes like there's a disconnect between like what's happening at the whole organism system or the organism to the cells, but just the simple act of what you are doing constantly, breathing, stimulates so many important things within our body to happen. So our circulatory system is very complex. Our, in general, circulatory systems have some kind of fluid, specifically ours, not all, I shouldn't say all of them, but our circulatory system has blood, which is the fluid, which all of this important stuff gets transported around. And it gets transported through a system of channels or tubes called blood vessels, which we saw in that picture of the head. And you need some kind of like thing to energize all this, to pump it throughout the body. And so we have this heart to pump, and pushes the blood throughout the body. So we're going to talk about our heart. Our heart is muscle. So just in looking at the model here, you know, oftentimes like this, we think of like muscle. It looks like what we might consider muscle in our brains to be. And so the heart is very muscular, but it also has other parts that are not as muscular, but it's got these flappy things, and it's got some sections in there that are open so the blood can move throughout. But it's also, it has these really big, the biggest blood vessels in our body are often found right connected to the heart, the pump that's going to get everything throughout our body or back to our lungs or out of our mouths from our lungs. So we have also this connection to, this is our trachea that connects to our lungs. And so even right here around the heart, you can see a distinct connection between the circulatory system and the respiratory system that's going to go out. You have these two branches to the lungs, which are right here and right here. So at the top of our heart here, you've got these really open, big open chambers. They're called atria. And then they are going to contract and push blood down into the more muscular part of the heart, the ventricles. The blood always flows down from atria to ventricle. And even when we see other organisms, it does that downward from atria to ventricles. The ventricles contract, and then they send blood to places like here, out to the body. The aortic arch here is going to send blood, and you can see that the aortic arch has all kinds of branches to it, that the aortic arch. It has these three right off the top that are going to go to places like your head and your arms. And then this here is the beginning of what we call the dorsal aorta. Dorsal means back. So think about like a shark has that fin that sticks out of the water. Okay, so dorsal, this means the back side. So when it's my heart here, the dorsal aorta is running basically on top of my spinal cord all the way down my body. One of the things about the aorta that a lot of people don't realize, it's not just this, but the dorsal portion stays about this thick and it goes all the way down your body until it gets down here, and then it starts to branch off into a little bit smaller vessels called the iliac arteries, which they branch into small branches throughout the pelvis, and then also down the legs.
Does the femoral artery come from there too?
Yes, yeah.
So vessels are the ones sending blood out atria, or what's the other one? Vessels and
The atria collect from the body, and it could collect from the actual body itself or from the lungs. So they're collecting to the heart, and then they pump down to the ventricles, and the ventricles pump blood out to the body. And when we say out to the body, what we mean is we mean out to the lungs and then back to the heart, or we mean physically out to the rest of the body. So our heart is highly evolved. In terms of evolution, when we talked about in evolution, we talked about how there were fish, things were in the ocean, right? And we have a common ancestor with fishes, and then fishes, some of them had mutations where they could crawl out of water onto land and have this kind of like little pouch off their stomach to allow them to fix or capture oxygen and then use it more efficiently. And they have these little like lobe fins that they could walk around on land. And then they had a very simple heart, that their heart only had one atria and one ventricle. We're gonna get to that in a second. And then with the common ancestor between fishes and amphibians, the amphibians, they have two atria and one ventricle. They don't have a wall here, which we call a septum. And then reptiles, kind of interesting that reptiles are starting to have mutation that is causing the septum to be favored, and we'll talk about why. And they have like a partial septum in the ventricles, but humans, we have a complete separation of the four chambers. And this is really important because evolutionarily, we want this separation, and we're going to talk about how the heart has kind of two essential pumps. You've got the right, and when you're looking at a heart, it's like this is my heart, so this is my right side, and this is my left side. And so the right side always carries deoxygenated blood, which means that it's collecting blood from the body, and then that goes from the atria to the ventricle, and then it's going to go out to, and there's branches here and here, and it's going to pump, the right side's going to pump deoxygenated blood out to the lungs, and then in the lungs, it's going to drop off carbon dioxide, it's going to pick up oxygen, and then it's going to, from the lungs, each of the lungs, it's going to bring the blood, and this one kind of sneaks through and into here, the left atrium, and here, you can see this goes right into the left atrium, and then collects that oxygenated blood and pumps it down. And again, it's separated from the deoxygenated blood, pumps it down, and then it pumps it here out to the rest of the body through the aortic arch.
So the point of having blood, the oxygen in the blood in your body, is that to do aerobic
cellular.
Respiration.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's like a huge connection between, so then if you think about just the act of breathing gets oxygen into our body. So breathing brings the oxygen to the circulatory system. The circulatory system takes the oxygen to the cells to undergo cellular respiration. The act of eating, how do we get the energy sources and nutrients into our body? It's from eating. So eating has these metabolic pathways that break down our food, and we'll talk about that when we get into digestion, that all of our food gets broken down via a lot of different mechanisms in our digestive system. And there's tons of circulatory vessels that surround all of especially your intestines. There's tons of these blood vessels that are going to take the energy and nutrients from the digestive system to the blood to your cells. So digestive system brings the energy and nutrients there, respiratory system, but in the meantime you have the circulatory system, who's the transporter of the breathing and the eating.
So in that sense, like the lungs need, blood to work too. So would there also be from the left side, would there have to be something to the lungs too to give them oxygenated blood?
Yes. Yeah, and that's why, so we have two lungs here. So in the right ventricle, so if I open up the heart, this is the right side, what you see is that this right ventricle area, see this big blue thing? When we're looking at the heart, it's one of the nice things about this unit is that everything is coded for you, just kind of, and it's not, you open up the body, it's not necessarily going to be like blue and red, but we code things so that you remember that any of these blue vessels, even these little tiny ones, they carry deoxygenated blood, and any of the red ones carry oxygenated. So when blood comes into the body, into the heart, you have this big one up top, which is called the superior vena cava. Some people say cava. I learned cava, so I say cava. So superior vena cava, inferior vena cava. So deoxygenated blood is being brought back to the right side of the heart from these two huge blood vessels, and then it goes down from the atria to the ventricle, and then that contracts and sends, you can see again blue is sending out to the lungs. Now here's where, the lungs get both oxygenated and deoxygenated blood. It's not, there's no separation of like the right lung does deoxygenated and the left lung does oxygenated. It's not like that. Only the heart is like that. So that's a really good question. We're gonna learn that arteries don't always carry oxygenated blood. Arteries always go away from the heart. And so here you have an artery. This is one of the kind of like those opposite things that maybe you've always learned. Arteries carry oxygenated blood. That's not always true, and especially on the heart, because the right side of the heart, which pumps the deoxygenated blood down, goes out to the lungs, the deoxygenated blood, via the pulmonary artery. But look, it's blue. So it's carrying deoxygenated blood, and then there's a branch here, and it branches off here. So this big guy, the pulmonary artery, begins to branch. So it goes to the left lung and to the right lung. And then when the blood comes back to the lungs, you have the pulmonary vein. So here's a vein that's red, that's carrying oxygenated blood, called the pulmonary vein. The pulmonary vein has branches here from the right side of the heart, the right lungs, the right lung, and the left lung. And so you've got the branching from both lungs too. Yeah. So it's like one of the things about the body or the cells that I always think is so fascinating is how intricately designed we've become. And all of this, again, remember that these characteristics are based on mutations that have happened, just random mutations. And when those random mutations have happened in the environment, those mutations that are beneficial have helped individuals to survive better. And when you can survive better, that means that females, remember there's this thing called sexual selection, that out in nature, that females will choose the males who survive more easily, which really means that they're choosing males based on the best traits for the environment right now. And sexual selection is a part of natural selection. And so that females are choosing these, like all these intricate mutations that have come up that have been beneficial, and going, okay, I'm gonna choose a male who's got these good mutations, these beneficial or advantageous mutations in the environment right now, and because that male can survive better, I'm gonna reproduce with that male, and then we're gonna have potentially offspring that also have those beneficial mutations. And that's just, like, all of this is natural selection. It's all based on evolution. So, that's one of the reasons why we start evolution first, is to give you that kind of thing in the back of your head, that everything about biology rotates around essentially evolution as a driver of every difference and every characteristic of every organism.
So if, goes into the lungs, deoxygenated, the blood picks up all the oxygen, is the point of it coming back into the heart? Is the point of that so that the heart can then pump it throughout the body, the oxygen?
Yeah, and so the heart really is just, if we think about, like, the heart's always got a pump, right? Because the heart has to get rid of all these bad things. The heart's got to get rid of this, and the heart's got to get more of this. And so every time the heart beats, what it's doing is it's pumping deoxygenated blood so that we can exhale that carbon dioxide, and then at the same time it's pumping back oxygenated blood so it can pump more oxygen out so that we can break down more energy sources, but eventually we end up producing waste products to get rid of. And so we have this constant need of in, out, in, out, in, out. But these are not happening in and then out. These are happening simultaneously because we have that separation. Because of this separation that we have in the heart, we can simultaneously get rid of this while we're bringing in more of that. So it's pretty cool too, right? Like, it's not like, gotta get rid of the bad and then new comes in, good comes in. We're doing it like we're getting rid of carbon dioxide while we're bringing oxygen back.
Does that mean, like, species you said that don't have a septum have to do them one at a time?
They don't do, well, okay, so fish who have only an atria and a ventricle, they're kind of, it's like we'll get to it, and it's a circle system. It's not, so that's in the case where it's happening like one at a time. It's kind of simultaneous, we'll get to that, but when we look at amphibians who don't have this septum, and they're pumping deoxygenated down, but they're also pumping oxygenated down, there's a little tiny bit of mixing here in the middle. And so what goes back out to the rest of the body has a mix of both oxygenated and deoxygenated blood. And what we really want is we want this side to be pumping purely oxygen out. And so the thing though is that because of the muscular nature of the heart and what we have called blood pressure, the pressure of the heart to push the blood down and out, it happens very quick, right? Like our heart beats kind of like that. And so there's not a lot of time for the mixing of the oxygenated and deoxygenated blood in the amphibians, and even when the reptiles have like a partial. So when they're both being pumped down and then out, there's not a lot of time in here for the mixing to happen. And that's all just a cause of the muscular nature of the heart. It makes everything happen really quick, so that when blood is pumped down and then it's gonna get pumped out in the next like second or millisecond, it doesn't really do that much here in terms of like the inefficiency of the mixing. I know, it's kind of interesting, because you'd think that it'd just be like, right? All right, so we're gonna look at the fish. So this is the system of the fish. The fish have, and fish were the first vertebrates that had mutations that evolved a heart. A lot of animals have just like blood areas that there's just everything is, the digestive system's just dumping out the waste products as well as the nutrients, and they're all in there. And so with like worms, for example, where they have a water system as opposed to a blood system, that they don't even have blood, everything gets into this blood, and then, into this watery area, and then all of the rest of the organs are kind of like trying to grab at the good stuff, like the nutrients and the oxygen, but also they're kind of like, okay, wait, oh, there's an oxygen behind that carbon dioxide. Oh, shoot, oh, it's gone, it moved again. So it's just really inefficient. When you have like insects who have a coelom, where it's just pools of blood that are surrounding the organs, again, in the blood, the organs are trying to like get rid of bad stuff, and then the good stuff they're trying to get, and so, and the movement of the animals causing that all to move a lot, it's not as efficient. At least, even though the fish have a closed system, that you have a system of blood vessels where the blood is captured, that's a little bit better than just it all kind of floating around the organs. And becoming, when you have a closed system of tubes, you have essentially a delivery system that can bring the good stuff, right? The nutrients, the hormones, the oxygen, and drop it off, and then can be like, okay, like I'm gonna drop this off and I'm gonna take this stuff. Because there's only one atrium and ventricle, there is mixing that happens, so there's a lot of inefficiency there. So it's kind of like inefficiency in an efficient system. It's almost like the first few weeks of a new job, right? You're a smart person, you can follow directions easily, you get along with your coworkers, but you're still kind of figuring out how to do the job. And so we have this like good thing that has flaws to it.
That's what it was.
Yeah. They have, instead of lungs, they have gills. So in water, they're breathing water. So they use gills. You have all of these like red flaps. We'll get to that in a second. So that blood goes from atria down to ventricle, goes to the gills, continues, these blood vessels will continue to the rest of the head, the brain, and then grab a lot of oxygen, dropping off carbon dioxide, and then bringing that out. So it's not a perfect system, but it's better than not having a closed system at all. So it makes this loop, and so the loop is constantly going. And one of the things about like the looping is that, again, it's here you have the ability of like the drop off and pick up, but some of the blood is a little bit mixed up. So it's not as nice as having, this is almost essentially oxygenated blood going out to the body, so you have some mixing in there. All right, so fish give rise to amphibians. They have a common ancestor with the amphibians. The amphibians have a common ancestor with the reptiles. And eventually with these two groups, what we do see is mutations that give rise to 2 atria and 1 ventricle. So what's happening is there's starting to be a separation between the deoxygenated side and the oxygenated side. Deoxygenated blood is on the right side of the heart. Oxygenated blood will be on the left side. So that's one thing to kind of remember, but also, your exam will be black and white, but I would pretty much guess there's gonna be a heart, because I'm spending a lot of time, and you'll see, we spend a lot of time going over the parts of the heart that you should really review and know all of the parts of the heart and what they do. So right side oxygenated, left side deoxygenated. When we're talking about the amphibians and the reptiles, they don't have this complete, again, a complete either no septum or complete septum, and so they have the two atria that are pushing the blood down and then going out. But again, it's pretty quick because of blood pressure, as I mentioned before, where there is a little bit of mixing, but it's not as inefficient as the fishes, and it's certainly not as inefficient as the insects or the worms. So we get a little bit better, and it's, you know, but, and here's it, and I'm not gonna necessarily say better, because when we think about like the invertebrates to the vertebrates, vertebrates have been around a lot shorter of a time period than the invertebrates, but the invertebrates are still thriving, right? So even though some of these, you know, like that's a weird thing about evolution, is that natural selection selects for all of our traits. Whether we're talking about us, or you're talking about the praying mantis, or you're talking about a worm or a bacteria, is that every characteristic that they have, or I shouldn't say every, but most characteristics are selected for in the environment which that lives in. So characteristics that we might compare, like we're better, but amphibians have been around a lot longer than us and are a lot more primitive in the systems. So does it mean that these advancements are better necessarily? In a lot of ways, we could say they're more efficient, but the amphibians are still thriving. So, you know, it's kind of like evolution is kind of maybe, I hope in this class gets you to think a little bit differently about what's better and worse. So eventually, amphibians and reptiles, they have a common ancestor with the birds and the mammals, and then we see the four-chambered heart evolve. So the great thing about that is the efficiency and metabolic demand is met. And there's a lot of things that go on in terms of mutations that are beneficial for birds and mammals, because remember that birds and mammals also have coverings to their body, whether we're talking about feathers or we're talking about fur or hair. And so those help us to stay warmer. And in addition, there's a whole mutation to the way that we get energy and break it down. One of the products of any metabolic pathway is that heat is given off. In the process of breaking bonds, heat is released. And so with birds and mammals, there were mutations that allowed them, instead of just losing heat to their environment, like especially reptiles do. Reptiles can not be active most nights because it's just too cold for them, because they're constantly losing heat. So they have to like rest in the cold times. Whereas we can be active at any time, mammals or birds, because we have kind of like two big things happening, or a bunch of things I should say. Three big things happening is that this kind of efficiency of the complete separation of the deoxygenated blood and oxygenated blood allows us to put oxygenated blood very exclusively out to the rest of the body without even that little bit of mixing. In addition, another mutation that allows us to efficiently, when bonds are broken, when we have metabolic pathways that happen and bonds are broken, that we can hold on to that heat instead of losing it to the environment like the reptiles. So we can hold on to our heat, which means that we can do things at night and be heated up. And then we have like even a coating, right? Hair or fur or feathers that allow us again to have like a natural coat on us. So there's a lot of those mutations that happen kind of maybe simultaneously, that's selected for birds and mammals to be able to take advantage of colder environments as well as the nighttime environment. So the big kind of take home here is that a four-chambered heart gives you the ability to exclusively send out oxygen to the body and exclusively take deoxygenated blood in, and get that deoxygenated blood exclusively through the pulmonary artery out to the lungs.
So what you're saying is all the animals that don't have like that septum, their blood kind of mixes, so like they're trying to figure out like, okay, I have a bunch of deoxygenated blood all around here, how do I grab all of it?
Yeah,
Okay.
right, because there's some carbon dioxide in the way. There's some carbon dioxide getting in here. Yeah. And again, it's not totally awful, but it's not as efficient. Not as I don't wanna say perfect.
So is the
Exclusive.
amphibians a little bit more efficient than the fish then?
Yeah, as you go with each kind of heart, as the efficiency gets better and better, and all of that just with kind of two take-home things here, is that the number of atria and ventricles, and like kind of look at this, the fish are flipped upside down because of the head would be down here. So one atria, one ventricle, mutation for two atria, one ventricle. And again, you can see like the purple is showing mixing, that there's still blood that is exclusively deoxygenated and oxygenated, and then you have this really nice like complete separation.
Are we gonna be tested on the steps of the pumps?
Oh yeah. I mean, anything we cover is open game, right? Okay, so let's talk about the human heart and go through the steps of the pump. We kind of think about like the human heart. So, before I get there, to pumps, remember, there's two atria. The atria are on top. So whether you're talking about like these are light blue on here, or it's showing really the heart would be, and they only make them, or they make it like light blue inside or pink on the outside. And again, it's just to kind of show you there's a difference here, but really the heart's gonna look like a big muscle. These flaps, when you do the dissection, you'll see that the flaps are a little bit a darker version of this muscle. So they're not going to be like a lighter color. They just do a little bit of color coding to accentuate the differences of the structures in the heart. So just like the trachea is not light blue with yellow rings on it. So atria at the top, they're pretty open. And then the ventricles have a bunch of like muscly things inside, and that's because they're gonna do the pumping out to the lungs and out to the rest of the body. So the bottom part of the heart really has to be strong. So it's got a lot more support in here. The other thing that the ventricles have, you can see like these muscly things here, the papillary muscles, is that the papillary muscles, in addition to helping this to be really strong as a pump in the bottom, is that you have these flaps. If you've ever seen like a EKG that shows the, or not an EKG, a ultrasound, and you see that like the heart looks like each chamber looks like something's going like that. These flaps have parts to them where it's not just one piece, but it's like pieces that are going like that. So that these need to be supported by tendons, the chordae tendineae, and the papillary muscles. That's where some issues of the heart happen, is that there's weakness in the flaps or the valves of the heart, and then people have to get those valves replaced or kind of supplemented in a way.
Is there a reason that the right artery is so much bigger, it seems, than the left?
You mean like the aorta? Or
yeah.
do you mean the vena cava?
No, not the artery, the atrium.
Oh, yeah, I think because it needs more room for collection of the deoxygenated blood. It's not like huge, yeah, I mean, you can definitely see that this one's a little bit bigger. The other thing too is that the left side of the heart, it's got all this stuff like kind of on top of it. So it gets a little smushed there too. So yeah, kind of. All right, so atria collect the blood from places like the body and the lungs, and what's gonna happen is these flaps are gonna temporarily go like this, and push the blood down. So each side has flaps that are gonna push the blood down to the ventricles. And then the ventricles are gonna contract. And when the ventricles do this like collection of the blood down and contract, they're gonna push the blood out to the lungs and then out to the body. Again, star this, so you remember that arteries go away from the heart. I like that, artery away. Vein too. I don't know, maybe if you can remember like V and T are close together in the alphabet, they go together. And this is particularly important in remembering that when we're looking at the pulmonary artery, comes from the ventricle of the right side of the heart, collects the blood from the ventricle, and the pulmonary artery, which is what color? Blue. It's carrying deoxygenated blood out to the lungs. So the pulmonary artery goes away, arteries go away. It's bringing deoxygenated blood from the right side away from the heart to the lungs. The pulmonary vein has a bunch of branches from the lungs, here from the left lung, here from the right lung, and then they meet underneath all of this big stuff here, is that they meet inside of the left atria. And so like when you're looking at the heart model, there's 4 dots inside of there, and the 4 black dots are basically saying that this is coming into the heart here, and these 2 are coming into the heart there. And so you have 4 parts of the pulmonary artery coming into the left atria. Blood gets oxygen from, we have lungs. Another thing that I like to think about is when we're going through the body systems is think about the amount of real estate. And when I say real estate, what I mean is how much of the body an organ takes up should kind of tell you a little bit about its importance, right? Like the head, our head has main things, right? We got a brain, we got a big brain. Does the brain take up the majority of our head? Yeah, right? Takes up like, so the brain takes up the majority of the head, which should tell you that our brain, it has a lot of real estate in our body, which means that it's really, really important. What else takes up real estate in your head? Your digestive system, right? You use this for digestion, but also respiration through your nose, your mouth, right? And so a lot of this is all dedicated here to eating and breathing. So connected to the heart, getting all that stuff out to the cells, to the lungs, the upper part. So we have a lot, like real estate here is for survival stuff like eating, breathing, and controlling the rest of the body. Eyes for watching, observing. So we have a hearing, and like a lot of our senses are concentrated up here. The top part of the body, the upper portion of the body, is pretty much heart and lungs. So all of this, I should say all of this here, is just for respiration and circulation. When you get down here, the majority of this down here, digestion. So again, to kind of get in your heads that this act of breathing and the act of eating and the act of pumping blood are all go down to the cellular level to make your cells do cellular respiration, which means that you're using oxygen to efficiently break down your energy sources so that your cells can do their things and run and control the rest of your body. Yeah, so it's all, everything we do is connected down to the cellular level. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the heart as a pump. It's really kind of like 2 separate pumps. You've got the right side, the right pump, and the left pump. So we will start with the collection of deoxygenated blood from the rest of the body. And so again, this is my heart here. I can see there's a big blood vessel here that goes into the right atrium. And then if I flip my heart over, my right atrium has also this big blood vessel here. And remember that this is continuing. So if this is my heart, this blood vessel here is continuing down my body. And so this is bringing blood from the lower part of the body, and this is bringing blood from places like the brain and the arms. Okay, so the right pump carries, you can see the vena cavas are blue. So this should remind you that that color cue of blue carries deoxygenated blood. Vena cava, vena cava, however you want to say it.
So, is it correct to say that veins all carry the deoxygenated blood and all the arteries carry the oxygenated blood?
No, because
Oh, you're talking about
the pulmonaries, right? So this is a pulmonary artery that carries deoxygenated blood.
CDs in the lungs.
For the most,
Gotcha.
for the most part, that can be true, but it's not a hard, fast rule. The hard, fast rule about arteries and veins is that arteries go away from the heart.
Okay, so
Yeah.
veins are on their way to get oxygen.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, no, not always. I mean, yeah. Yeah, that's kind of true, yeah.
But can veins, like, I kind of like phased out
When I started talking about evolution.
veins carry to the heart, but it could be oxygenated or deoxygenated, because it has to like recycle either way, so isn't it gonna be deoxygenated?
Again, for the most part, veins will carry deoxygenated blood. But there's a couple, like the umbilical artery and vein are opposite of that, as well as the pulmonaries. So there's two big cases. There's some other small cases in the body too, but so just remember, arteries go away from the heart, and veins go to the heart. Okay, so the vena cavas collect blood from the top of the body, the lower part of the body, into the right atria, and pretty much the atria contract, and then the valves push, and the ventricles contract. And it's not like a big difference in contraction, it's kind of like that, so that it's almost one fluid motion. So we say the atria contract, it's not like they contract, and then it's a couple seconds later, and the blood's pushed down. Remember, this is happening, you can feel the pulsing of your blood and the pulse in your carotid artery and jugular vein in your neck. It's going. And like when you exercise, it's going faster, right? Because when you're exercising, you need more efficiency of breaking down your energy and nutrients because you are moving quicker. So the atria, like when we say the atria contract, so the blood is collected by the vena cavas, and then the blood comes into here, and this contracts, so the top part contracts, and within a millisecond, the blood is pushed down, and the ventricles contract and push the blood out. So it's all of these like contractions, even though it's like atria contract and ventricles contract, it's very, very quick, like that. So blood goes into the right ventricle here. Ventricle contracts, it's going to push blood, and I should really take this part of the heart to show you. So if this is the right side of the heart, so remember this is the right side of the heart, even though I'm turning it over, but you're seeing the right side of the heart, is that this is the right ventricle, and inside the right ventricle, you've got this opening here, and then inside here we have a valve called the semilunar valves, and then it's going to contract and push the blood here, which this is, now again, the right side, coming from the right side of the heart, to the pulmonary artery. So here's a blue artery, an artery that carries deoxygenated blood away from the body to the lungs. So then, pulmonary artery, you can see one branch, it's going to go out to the left lung. This branch already branches quickly into smaller branches to go to the right lung.
Pulmonary is just to and from the lung.
Yeah, pulmonary is to and from the lungs. Yeah. All right, so that contracts, pushes deoxygenated blood via the pulmonary artery. Pulmonary artery goes away from the heart to the lungs. It's going to drop off carbon dioxide. So, goes to the lungs. The lungs are going to do their magic. We'll talk about all of the little sacs, the alveoli in the lungs that are coated with little tiny blood vessels, which are from these. What happens is that these bigger blood vessels quickly branch from the large to smaller, all the way down to the cellular level of capillaries, which are microscopic and teeny weeny that come in contact with every little air sac in your lungs. So your lungs are not like just some open thing where air goes in and out of, but it's carried, the carbon dioxide is carried via little teeny blood vessels to these sacs, where you're going to have the process of diffusion, which we'll cover a little bit more when we get into the respiratory system. But the carbon dioxide is going to go from high concentration in the capillaries to low concentration into the alveoli. And these little teeny weeny sacs, these little open sacs, which are microscopic, are going to allow us to then get rid of the carbon dioxide and then also do gas exchange to pick up the oxygen. So now, carbon dioxide is dropped off at the lungs, oxygen is picked up, and going from the capillaries to what we're going to call capillaries to venules to the large pulmonary veins. Going into, remember this is my left side, so here's the left atria. So if I flip the heart around, going into the left atria here, and then sneaking through from the right side. I know there's a lot of like this, like things are going through each other. A lot happening with all of these large blood vessels, and especially with the respiratory system, with the trachea. And you can see in the trachea, like it's kind of a major theme in the body is branching. And in any organism, that a lot of what happens is that you've got these big structures that branch smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. So going from this big thing to the microscopic level is what happens, and going from this big thing to the microscopic level, that eventually you have these larger structures that branch smaller and smaller. So now you've got these two from the right lung and these two from the left lung that are going to go into, and they're going to meet inside of the right side of the heart. And the 4 dots, there's 4 black dots inside to indicate that these two and these two are coming into here. So now we're on the left side of the heart. So remember that the left pump is going to carry oxygenated blood. The blood's coming from the lungs. Goes into the left atria. The AV valves are going to contract, push blood down. Valves always push down keep the blood flowing in the correct direction. Goes to the ventricle. The ventricle, the left ventricle is going to contract, and then it's going to send blood through the semilunar valves of the aortic arch. So the aorta has two big parts. It's got the arch part, but it continues to the dorsal aorta. So remember, when we're talking about dorsal aorta, that this is going to run down my body, but it's going to be running on top of my spinal cord, which is on the back of my body. So, like, remember again, dorsal is like, shark has a dorsal fin. That big fin on the back of its body is the dorsal fin. Anything that's dorsal in our body runs down the back side. The aorta, big, major artery. And then you can see already, like with the aorta, that you have the aortic arch that starts to get branches immediately off the top. And these top branches are going to go to the head. Like this one's going to branch and go to the carotid arteries. It'll branch off to the head. Carotid arteries, these are going to branch to the left arm and the right arm to become the subclavian arteries out to the arms. So when we say out to the body, we don't mean like the body, we mean the whole body, including, we're considering the head as part of the body. And I'll, you know, like right away, you've got 3 branches immediately that service the head and the arms. And then the dorsal aorta, it starts like, it has like little stops, like a subway station, right? It's gonna stop here, and then it's gonna stop here. And every time it kind of stops, it has another branch that goes in another direction to service other things in our body. Okay, so now look at this. So we've gone through it with the model and words, and now we're going to go through it with pictures. So, right, we're spending a lot of time talking about the heart, and you have a whole portion of your practical is going to be on the model. So we really want you to know the parts of the heart and what they do. So we're looking at the left side of the heart. The inferior vena cava. Inferior, also, it's sometimes people refer to this as the posterior. Posterior means bottom. Posterior, like your posterior. The bottom part. Inferior, right? Inferior is lower than superior. If you're inferior to something, you are inferior to the superior thing. Superior meaning upper, or anterior means upper.
So both of them are related?
Yeah, so they're,
And those are arteries, right? I mean, those are veins, right?
yeah. Well, yeah, because they're going through the heart. Yes, yes, yes. So here's them again. Inferior, no. Superior or anterior vena cava, inferior or posterior vena cava. Both of them coming into the right atrium. So they're bringing blood in and in. Oh, sorry. Blood will go through, it'll be pushed down via the AV valve. AV valve will push the blood down, keep it moving in the right direction. The right ventricle will contract and blood will be pumped through. We have valves here too, called the semilunar valves. That will keep the blood moving into the pulmonary artery and out to the heart. So you can see it's like a T shape. That one is going to go out to the left lung, one branch is going to go out to the left lung, and then the other branch sneaks through the arch of the aorta and goes to the right lung. This is the pulmonary arteries. Arteries go away from the heart. Blood from the left lung, let's going to go into pulmonary veins, which are going to go into the left atrium. Pulmonary veins on the right side from the right lung. They're going to sneak behind everything. So when we're talking about them, we're talking about these that are going underneath all of this into right here, the left atrium. Left atrium is going to contract. The valve, the AV valve, is going to push the blood down into the ventricle. Ventricle is going to contract. It's going to push blood through a semilunar valve. Oh, I'm sorry, the semilunar valve will keep the blood moving from the ventricle to the aortic arch, and blood going up to the head and out to the arms, and then continuing. And so this thing down here is, remember, the bottom of the aorta, which means it's coming behind the heart all the way down to the dorsal aorta. So if you wanted to write, this is the dorsal aorta, just so you know what this means here, we're talking about this thing continuing behind the heart and going all the way down the body, dorsal aorta. So I've mentioned a few other important things like valves in the heart and chordae tendineae and papillary muscles, so we'll talk about those. All right, so we have the atrioventricular valves. I love the name. If you're like, where are these? Atrioventricular, so they're between the atrium and the ventricles. It tells you the location right in the name. So one is that, yeah, they're going to separate the atrium and the ventricles, but the important thing is that they are going to be pushing the blood downward and going in the right direction. So those, remember, if you're looking at like an echo or ultrasound, you're going to see those things that are going, and their job is to push the blood in the right direction because you don't want it going backward. So like if they stop functioning well, they're not going to keep the blood moving in the right direction, which could back up. If this little thing here starts to malfunction, we don't want deoxygenated blood backing up in the body. So it's really important that they're doing their little flap, 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 flap. They're preventing the backflow of blood. They're keeping the blood moving in the right direction. The left side is called the bicuspid. Got two parts, or called mitral. The right side is the tricuspid. It has three parts. So I can't do that with my hands. So I'd like to remember R and T are close to each other in the alphabet. These are not super close, but they're closer than, I mean, they're further, well, they're closer together. At least these two, if you can remember, R and T go together, the right is a tricuspid, then you can, like, process of an elimination, remember these two go together. All right, semilunar valves. Semilunar valves are found, as I mentioned, between the ventricles and where the ventricles go next. So ventricles, if we're looking at the right ventricle, the valves to where the blood goes next, the blood goes to the pulmonary artery. You've got semilunar valves here between the ventricle and the next place that the blood goes. So these are the semilunar valves. They don't get a fancy name for whether we're talking about the left side of the heart or the right side of the heart. And then when we're looking at the left side of the heart, you've got the semilunar valves, and this is leading underneath the pulmonary artery into the beginning of the aortic arch. And their job, again, keeping the blood moving in the right direction so we don't get backflow. We don't want the blood going backward, we want it going forward always in the heart. The heart is a big muscle, so it needs its own service station of arteries and veins. What we call those that hug onto the heart, we call those the coronary arteries. When these get occluded, when I say occluded, when they get stopped up with fats, that get hard and turn into plaque, that's what leads to heart attacks, infarctions, myocardial infarction or heart attacks. So so I always like to tell students, because I like to kind of connect all of this to the real world, is if you know your biological parents, if you have a connection to your biological, your genetic family, kind of look at your relatives and see what kind of diseases that they have. Those are the ones you are likely most susceptible to. So, like, my dad had a triple bypass, meaning that there were 3 portions of this system that were stopped up. They were blocked, and he had a heart attack. And so when you say single, double, triple, it means that there's 3 parts that are occluded or blocked up, and it means that you have to have veins from the legs that are taken out, portions of them, and what they do is, it's probably better to do this, is that they take a vein, and if, let's say this is blocked up here, they take a vein and they connect it here onto the aortic arch. I should say after. So if it's occluded here, it goes from the aortic arch to here. So now, because the blood is stopped up at this part, you have blood being brought via this vein that was taken out of the leg from the aortic arch to service the rest of this system down here. Every time you have a single, a double, a triple, it means that you've got like another blockage here that needs to have a vein, or another one from here to, let's say, like the blockage is here, another one from the aortic arch to here. Some people have quadruple.
So what is the difference between that and like a stent? Doesn't it like hold like something like hold it open?
Yeah, so a stent is the like precursor. They'll monitor people. They do it a lot better now. The stent, and we'll get to stents too, that it'll basically, like, if you have a lot of plaque starting to build up right here and it's still sneaking through enough, a stent will basically like open this area that's starting to get occluded. It'll like physically open it up and or break up the occlusion or what's blocking that.
And so you're getting a heart attack when these are blocked up because you're not getting, your heart itself isn't getting enough oxygen and nutrients?
Yeah, so your heart, if your heart doesn't have oxygen, nutrients, can't take away waste products, you get buildup of carbon dioxide. There's a lot of bad things going on when the heart muscle can't get what it needs to function. And remember, the heart muscle is pumping the blood, which is bringing all the important things around your body and bringing the not so great things back to get out of the body. So when the heart stops working, the rest of you goes bad really quick. Blood going up to your brain, if you don't get blood up to your brain, if the heart stops pumping and blood is not pumped up to your brain controls everything. It's the control center. The brain says, it sends messages throughout the body, do this, do that, do this, do that. And so if the heart stops functioning, the cells in the body stop working, the brain stops working, and then everything just kind of like shuts down. Because then the brain, it's like, does things to help you breathe too. So if you stop blood flowing, stop breathing, everything goes, it's a cascade really quickly when the heart stops working. Oh wait, sorry. You good?
I forgot what I was
Okay, might be answered eventually. All right, carotid artery is the 2 big arteries that come off the aorta into the neck. Those are the ones you can feel in your neck. You can feel your pulse of your heart. Jugular veins are right next to those. So you've got the arteries going up, carotid arteries going up, branch, smaller. And then you have smaller branches out, back to the jugular veins. And then the jugular vein is the jugular veins are going to merge with the superior or anterior vena cava. The chordae tendineae are the tendons that connect to the AV valves, and tendons help muscles to function. We're gonna stop there because where we left off, carotid artery, remember that you have from the aortic arch, two branches split off, or one of the branches of the aortic arch goes up into your neck. That's a carotid artery. And then coming down, back from the brain, all the little, we just went through this, yeah. Just reiterating this last bit before we get into the next stuff. All of the blood vessels in the brain that are returning back to the heart come back via the jugular veins. So this picture you can see carotid artery, red, carrying oxygenated blood up to the head, jugular vein carrying deoxygenated blood back to the anterior or superior vena cava. You have them on this side, but this person, because they're kind of like this way, you also have them both on this side. So you'll see them. And when we do the pig dissection, you'll see a set on each side of the neck.
But it's still big because technically when it's going away from the brain, it's going towards the heart.
Yeah.
Okay.
Arteries go away, carotid arteries go away from the heart, jugular veins go to the heart. Chordae tendineae. The chordae tendineae, these are tendons that connect to the flaps of the heart. When we're talking about flaps, we're talking about on the left side of the heart, the mitral or bicuspid AV valves, the tricuspid on the right side of the heart, AV valves, or we're talking about the semilunar valves. Any of the valves are going to have these tendons that are going to help with that opening and closing. And remember that the flaps of the heart keep the blood flowing in the right direction, pushing the blood to flow from the atria to the ventricles, flowing down, and then flowing up when we're talking about the semilunar valves. And then the chordae tendineae are supported by papillary muscles. So these right here.
I don't know if this is true, but are the valves that open and close what makes like the heartbeat sound? Or does it hits against?
The whole contraction of the heart is what makes the heartbeat sound. So the entire heart, remember that the atria contract and then the ventricles contract. And so then that kind of, it's within milliseconds that it goes like that. So it's kind of like, that contraction of the heart is what you hear as your pulse. So they're part of doing that. They're all connected. And they're more so for making the blood flow in the right direction and preventing blood to go backward. All right, so the heart always has to work, always. What we call the working of the heart in regular time is the cardiac cycle. This is what. Right. Yeah. Cardio. When you do cardiovascular exercise, I do cardio. I'm gonna go do my cardio. You move, and your blood pumps faster, which means your heart beats faster. Yeah. Or also we call it aerobic respiration. Aerobic exercise, because it makes you breathe faster. Aerobic respiration happens faster. Okay. Right. You're breathing faster. The cardiac cycle is an alternation of contract, relax, contract, relax, contract, relax, contract, relax. That's why you hear a boom, 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 contract, and then nothing, contract, and nothing. That's the contraction and the relaxation of the heart. The heart rate, pulse rate, which you took in lab last week, is the number of times your heart contracts and relaxes within a minute. There's a lot of genetics involved in this, and we can enhance our genetics by exercise. So people who, we were talking about like the cardiac cycle of somebody who is an athlete, usually their pulse rate is much lower per minute because their heart gets a lot of exercise. So one contraction of the heart can push the blood further than somebody who just sits around and does this all day. And this is not a ton of exercise, right? Moving your thumbs or your hands or whatever. But the more you do cardiovascular exercise, cardio aerobics, then your heart gets stronger. So everything has to run smoothly. What you were testing when you did the ECGs last week is you connected these leads, the stickers with the little wires. What that was detecting were electrical signals that pulse throughout our body. Sharks have a sixth sense. We have 5 senses, sharks have an extra one. Sharks raise and skates. And what they can feel is they can feel the electrical pulses given off by other organisms. So technically, if a shark came up to you, it could feel the pulse of your heart, because the pulse of our heart is regulated by electrical signals. When we talk about electrical signals within the heart, what we're talking about is we're talking about the flushing of ions. So we get down to the atomic level, and even smaller in some cases when we're talking about negative ions.
So you potassium?
Yeah, so the potassium, the potassium pump, and then there's the calcium and potassium. Switch up. Yes, the potassium. You have a natural pacemaker in your heart. So when someone has to get a pacemaker, what it means is they're getting the pacemaker of their heart, they're getting assistance to that. The pacemaker is a thing that's like making sure the flushing happens regularly. So one of the cool things about heart cells is that they are shaped really oddly. A lot of times we think of a cell, it's like shaped like this, but in our body, we have, and we'll see, like the neurons are shaped really oddly as well, or maybe everything's kind of like not just textbook round kind of cell, or a plant cell is a rectangle, but there are many different shapes of cells, even when we're talking about plants and protists and fungi, as well as bacteria cells. The heart cells are almost like letter H's or V's, and they have connections. So this is one cell right here. I should actually look at maybe this cell. So this cell is just like a little tube, but then like this cell here, it's kind of like a letter H, and it's connected to another cell up here and another cell here. This one here, it's connected here to 2 cells, and then it's connected to 1, 2, 3 cells. So the heart cells are not just kind of like your regular round cells. They have connections to other cells. And so what their plasma membranes are doing is allowing ions to flush from one plasma membrane to the next one.
So what kind of condition would you have in order to need a pacemaker?
So some of it can be genetic. Like I know one of my friends, his son is your age, and he had to get a pacemaker because he was born with a genetic issue where his heart wasn't pumping regularly. And because his heart wasn't pumping regularly, they didn't really, like he started to get a lot of fatigue and was having a hard time being athletic. He would have a lot of like times where he'd get this like stuttering breath suddenly for no good reason. And so all of these things, they were like, this is not normal for like a 19-year-old. And so they started taking him to the doctor, and they figured out that his pacemaker of his heart was just not working properly. So sometimes these issues can be just genetic issues. Sometimes your pacemaker, as you get older in life, it wears out. And so, and it could be a little bit of that is genetic, probably genetic predisposition, and some of it could be environmental factors, like let's say you're smoking a lot. That could lead to maybe your pacemaker having issues or other kind of like environmental issues like that. But sometimes it's just old age. Your pacemaker wears out and they give you a new one. And then it's like pretty good with the new pacemaker.
So how do they replicate a pacemaker?
They put, they actually, into your chest, they put an electric,
Pulse?
yeah, like an electric thing, and it does the job.
So it's like inside or outside?
Inside, on the heart, yeah. So here's the electrocardiogram that you looked at, the ECG. Each one of these, when you take a look at this whole series, you can see the repeating of this series over and over again. And what you're seeing is you're seeing a PQRST wave, and the P is this little hump here, and then the Q is this little tiny down spike, and then it spikes up. That highest spike is the R, and then again a little tiny down spike is the S, and the T is from here to this little tiny hump. And what this tells you is it tells you and depolarization and polarization, and that all refers to the ions flushing in your heart, which lead to having the contraction and relaxation of the heart. And so like this is contraction and this is relaxation. So the heart pacemaker is called the SA node, the sino-atrial node. It's on the right atrium. When you take a look at the heart model, you'll see like a little blue, I think it's a blue, like painted blue area, and that's where the SA node is. So electrical signals pass kind of like this, like across, so from the right atrium across to the left atrium, so that the atria in milliseconds contract together, and then what happens is those signals flush around the walls of the ventricles, and so they go kind of like around and then through the septum so that the ventricles contract. And again, all of this flushing, this is what is so amazing about cells, is that at the cellular level, within milliseconds, you're talking about these electrons, the positive, or the, sorry, I should say the ions, the positive and negative ions are flushing within like milliseconds, less than a second, flushing so that the heart can contract every more than a second, right? Because I bet a lot of you had about an 80, somewhere around an average 80, 70, 80, 90 pulse rate, somewhere in there, which means that if your heart is beating, let's say 80 times a minute, it is beating more than 1 time a second, right? That's what that means. So your heart is working pretty quickly. And the amazing thing too is like, can you, like just sitting there, can you feel your heart pumping? Like you're just sitting there, you can feel your heart doing this. Can you really feel it? You can feel like it's beating out of your chest. So like, I mean, we don't really, if you're sitting there, could you localize, like if you could just feel like this? No, we don't even feel it for the most part, right? Because you would imagine that something that is going to pump fluid from here to here to here, all the way down to there and back, I would imagine it's like a big pump, but we don't even feel it. It just happens. A pretty outstanding that this all is so smooth, so fluid, pumping the fluid. Then it's sent to the AV node, the atrioventricular node, which then sends that signal on. It makes sure to receive that signal, or it receives that signal and then makes sure to push on that signal to the ventricles. Again, milliseconds to get the signal from there to there contraction of the atria and ventricles within, so that it's kind of like. So here, you can see at the top of the right atrium, that's the SA node, the sinoatrial node. And then it's going to flush its signal across to the left atrium, but also in flushing that signal across, it hits the cells of the AV node, which then are going to send that signal through the walls of the ventricle. So around and then up through the septum. Okay, so you did this kinda. We had those really nice like electronic ones, but hopefully at least you started to do this process and you like listened in your neck or your pulse and then listened in your arm. How many of you actually found it in the little crux of your arm? Yeah, it was hard, right? Yeah, it was very difficult to do. So let's talk a little bit about the cardiac cycle. Cardiac cycle will happen and then it repeats and repeats and repeats and repeats, and that's repeating with every one of your heartbeats. We use the cardiac cycle to tell our blood pressure, and our blood pressure will tell us a lot of things about the health of our heart and whether our heart is beating at a normal level or if it's beating too high. If your heart is beating like you have hypertension, you might feel that in a different way, like your head feels a little like out of control, like stress, right? Do you ever have that day where, like yesterday, get up in the morning and we're going out the door and I'm dropping my son off at the little kiss and go, and he gets out of the car, and then all of a sudden I go to drive away and he's banging on the window. And immediately I'm like, you know, like, what is going on? And I could feel my cardiac cycle rise up faster. And it feels just like a, I don't know, it's that hard feeling to explain, right? He drops his phone in a puddle. I dropped my phone! And I'm like, well, get it out, right? Like so, and then it took me like a half hour to kind of get that back down. But little tiny events can make that go up really quickly. So our blood pressure, we could tell a lot about our health. Like if I monitored my blood pressure right after that, I am sure I would have been like 160, my systolic number. Probably would have been pretty high. So systolic number, what that is the contraction of the heart, and it really is measured during the contraction of the ventricles because they're the more muscular part of the heart. The diastolic is the relaxation part of the cardiac cycle. I always remember systolic is higher in the alphabet than D, diastolic. The S is higher in the alphabet, so it's the higher number. Okay, so you go to give blood. Great, easy community service. If you're somebody who can tolerate doing that process, I highly suggest do it because there's always a blood shortage, and it's even more than ever. It's like every day, it's like, it's worse and worse and worse. So if you want to do community service, it's a great way to save a few people's lives, is to donate blood. I do it about every 8 weeks. I try and fit that in. So try if you can. And you get like, you know, juice and cookies, and I usually get like a t-shirt or a hat like every so often. So it's kind of nice. Okay, so they put the arm, they put the cuff on you. And then 2, they stick that stethoscope end here. And so they're listening for your pulse. You get your pulse, pump that up. What they're doing is they're actually cutting off the flow of blood temporarily into your arm.
I can do it.
Yeah, and sometimes you can, like, because I know this process, I can look and see what my systolic and diastolic are, because I can feel it. I can feel when the blood is cut off and then when it starts to flow again. So you might be able to, once you know this, kind of figure out like, oh, okay, that, and then that, okay.
How often could you give your blood?
8 weeks.
Did you already say that?
No, I didn't, I
No,
didn't,
just-
I did not say it. You can do it every 8 weeks. You give a liter of blood and your body regenerates that liter in 8 weeks. If you could give plasma's a little more time intensive. You sit in a chair and you go into they hook you up to a machine on both arms and they usually play like a movie and they put some warm blankets on you. And you relax for about 2 hours and they take your plasma. Plasma is really important for especially people with cancer. So there you're really like helping out people. So the pulse, they pump this up and they listen. They're gonna start, right, once it's pumped up, it starts to relieve the pressure. Because they cut off the flow of blood, so they're listening at first, I hear the pulse, I pump it up, no pulse, right? Because you cut off, if the cuff is here, you've cut off the flow of blood in the arm. That's why it's so tight, is they cut off the flow of blood. And then what the person is doing is they're letting the pressure go, so this is getting less tight. And what they're listening for is they're listening until they hear the pulse again. And the first time that they hear the pulse, again, flowing, meaning that the blood is starting to flow back because this is released pressure, that's the systolic number. So oftentimes, like I said, you can kind of you almost feel like a boom, and you're like, oh, my blood is flowing again. Look at that. That's the systolic number. It's an indicator again of ventricular contraction of your heart. So then the pressure, it keeps going, right? Going down, going down. And so what the person is listening for is when there's a regular flow of blood, then it gets quiet suddenly. And that's the diastolic number. That one's harder for me to figure out, but at least I know systolic, I'm like, oh, that's it. I can feel it. And when that blood flow is flowing regularly through the arm, then that's an indicator of the relaxation part of the cardiac cycle. So these are things that amaze me, that somebody figured out this whole process to be an indicator of our overall heart health. And so again, what happens is this is pumped up really tight. The person doesn't hear the pulse in the arm because the blood is cut off. So indicates that the artery in the arm is closed. They're letting that pressure go down. This is getting less and less air in it, less pressure. And when they first hear the pulse again, it indicates that that artery is open enough for the blood to go and flow into the arm, and that's the systolic pressure. They're still listening, and when it goes quiet, it's gonna be boom, boom, boom. And then it's quiet, and that's the diastolic number. It means the artery is fully open then. It's measured in millimeters of mercury. Normal blood pressure is about 40 points apart. Now, it often will switch. I'm not sure why it gets switched from things like 1 year it'll be like 120/80 is a healthy blood pressure, and then the next year it's like 110/70. So somewhere around 120 to 110 systolic, 70 to 80 diastolic, but what you're really looking for is about 40 points apart. So even up to maybe 140, you're okay. A lot of that also depends on your genetics and your family history. If you don't know your biological family, then it's a lot harder to know, do I have a genetic history? Then sometimes you can't look into your family and see what kind of diseases might I expect because I share the same genetics. So 140/90 is they usually maybe you should start thinking about a little more heart health. Maybe the physician the physician's assistant, the nurse practitioner, the nurse might say, do you exercise? Maybe you should like get some brisk walking into your day, right? Want to get that down more. Find ways to relax. Maybe a little meditation. Higher or lower will indicate, like if you're higher than 140, it starts to indicate high blood pressure, which is also called hypertension. And then low blood pressure means that your heart is just like pump. Pump. Your heart's a little too relaxed. And we want a regular pumping of the heart. All right, National Health Institute standards, optimal again, 120 over 80, 110 over 70, 40 points apart. Kind of still normal, 130s. You get higher than 140 over 90, you're starting to get into like what we would call a high normal. They might be like, let's start concentrating on heart health. 160, getting that 160 range, 150, 160, they're saying, you have hypertension, you have high blood pressure. Moderate, getting into the 170s, 180s, and if you're like in the above 180s, they're gonna like really work on your hypertension, and we'll get to that in a second. Okay, so let's talk about some functions of circulation before we get into diseases. Yeah. Oh.
What's it called?
Thanks.
So energy drink, how long was risen of the heartbeat?
Excuse me, say again.
Energy drinks, like Red
Oh,
Bull,
energy drinks? Yeah, they speed that up. It's like caffeine, same thing.
So which ones they speed like
It'll up everything.
okay.
It'll make your heart beat faster. Yeah. Alcohol, for example, will make your heart beat slower. So there's drugs and even, nutrition, energy drinks. They're not qualified as a drug. Caffeine's not qualified as a drug, but it does ups your heart rate, right?
I can feel it so bad when I drink caffeine, because I have a heart rate really high normally.
Yeah.
So when I have a little bit of caffeine,
You're like jittery, right?
not jittery, I can usually feel my heart sitting normally.
Okay.
After I have caffeine, it's
Yeah.
like boop, 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 boop.
Yeah.
I feel
And sometimes you can hear it in your head. Yeah, those things like, are they a drug? Can they do damage to you long term?
Isn't it like the most addictive? It's pretty addictive.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh yeah.
But I was gonna say.
You can have caffeine withdrawals, for sure. So if you're withdrawing from something, is that an addiction?
So technically you're like burning more calories like when you drink it.
Yeah, but not like you're not gonna lose 10 pounds in a month by
Yeah.
drinking something caffeinated.
I did.
high blood pressure for.
Yeah. You might get a little more like, but it's not significant enough.
Do you have this question?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. No. No. Okay. Oh, which of the following people would have the highest blood pressure during ventricular relaxation? What's the indicator of relaxation? Which number? The systolic or the diastolic? Diastolic. So what's the lowest diastolic number of your choices?
70?
Yeah, 70, which is letter B. Correct.
Why does it make the blood pressure high?
Oh, no, we're saying the highest blood, highest. No, highest, I read. The highest would be the highest diastolic, which is D. Sorry about that. Thank you for questioning me. I don't think I drank enough caffeine today. Okay, yeah, let me know if I'm missing any questions as we go. Functions of circulation. So one, we talk about transport of oxygen. Could also be then carbon dioxide coming back, right? The waste product of cellular respiration. To take nutrients and hormones and transport them to all of the cells in our body, to get wastes from our cells, but also places that are really going to concentrate on removing wastes, like the liver and the kidneys. This is interesting, regulates your body temperature. How about that? If you are outside and it's cold out, what are the first things that get cold? Yeah, your fingers, your toes, your nose, your ears. That's why it's like the masking I loved because it kept my face warm, my nose warm, right?
I
So
needed masks in summer, but in the winter it was like you didn't even need a scarf, you just had the
yeah.
mask. Okay.
So like even in this winter when it's cold out, I go walk the dog, I put my mask on, because I'm like, oh, it keeps my face warm. Yeah. So if you fall into icy water, fall through ice and icy water, what your body does is your body is like, well, arms and legs are good, but what's really important? Your brain. So it's going to keep the warm blood going to your brain and to the trunk of your body where your organs are. But your brain is like, well, let's protect this part, the trunk and head of our body, because it's got the most important things. We could do without fingers, we could live without fingers and toes and feet and arms, right? And legs, but we can't live without this stuff. So your temperature goes here. So that's why when it's cold outside, you get cold here, and you get cold here, and especially your fingers and toes and your nose and your ears get cold, right? That's why everybody always says, wear a hat when it's cold outside. Because you really want to keep the heat, instead of it radiating off your head, you want to like keep it around your brain. So wearing a hat, there's actually something to that, and you're not losing heat. Because remember, if blood regulates body temperature, it's sending a lot of heat up to your brain when it's cold. So you are literally radiating heat off your body. So wearing a hat makes your body more efficient. Or a hood, right? Like now a lot of people wear the hoodies. Or if you wear the hijab, right? It keeps your head nice and warm all the time, so that's great.
So technically, if you wear like aluminum foil, it's not like aluminum foil, but you know the reflective heads.
Yeah.
Like an inside box.
I mean, you could wrap your head in aluminum foil. Sure, that would be.
Like it makes sense because you're keeping heat and it's reflecting.
But make sure you put like little antennas, so at least people like. But yes, yeah, I get what you're saying. Like, why don't we just line our hoodies with like a little bit of them? Also, to prevent blood loss and infection. So look at all of the different systems that are involved with the functions of circulation. All right, so blood itself. Blood is a fluid that is composed of 55% plasma and only 45% cells. We have about 5 to 6 liters of blood. If you are like a small person, small petite person, you have probably more like 5 liters. If you are a very tall, bigger person, you probably have 6, maybe even 7 liters of blood. Your body can manufacture that through your bone marrow. Plasma is about 90% water, and then there's other stuff in there like nutrients and ions, gases, salts, even waste products as well are transported throughout your plasma. Okay, so of the 45% of our blood that are cells, 99% of those are red blood cells. They're known as erythrocytes also. They are shaped to go through our round blood vessels, right? Round. We learned that as a child, that round shapes go through round holes, square shapes go through square holes. So there's something evolutionarily, a nice mutation that complements the two of them. Main job is to carry oxygen. That's why we have so many, because remember that oxygen helps us to more efficiently break down our energy sources. There's a protein called hemoglobin on your red blood cells, your erythrocytes, that help to bind oxygen to the red blood cells, which also uses iron help that binding process. The iron gives them a red color. How many of you are anemic? Most women are a little bit anemic. Anemia can run through families, and what that means, anemia means that you have like not a great ability to carry oxygen. This system here is kind of messed up, so you take an iron supplement. So if you're anemic, like I take an iron supplement because if I don't, I am definitely anemic. So like, and I know that because when I go to give blood, if I run out of my iron supplement, sometimes I get rejected for being a donor that day. So then they actually test, they do a little of your finger, which I'll be honest with you, the worst part of giving blood to me is that little tiny little pinprick on your finger. Because remember that your fingers have, they're used in the sensation of tactile touch. And so we have a lot of nerve endings or nerves here in our fingers. And so we feel, right? We feel a lot with our fingers. And so it hurts more here than it does here. So whenever they're like, do that, I'm like, oh, that's nothing. I'm always like, oh, stop.
It hurts it less when they do it like on the sides everything.
Yeah, they usually don't. Which is fine, it's not a big deal. But anyway, so my blood will not float, the blood sinks, my blood will float if it's not enough iron, metal, heavy, it sinks.
They put it in water?
Well, they used to, actually now they put it in oil. Everything gets more modern. So it's in a solution, I'm not sure what the solution is, but anyway. So if you are anemic, you want to take iron so that you can better bind oxygen to your red blood cells, which will boost your metabolism. And again, not boost your metabolism to be like I'm going to lose 10 pounds this month by taking an iron supplement. It just meaning that it's going to be more efficient in the process of breaking down my energy.
Doesn't iron, is it iron that makes you feel like tired? Because I remember my mom telling me she was like, I was tired this whole month, and she's like, I was like, why? She's like, I don't know, I just started taking iron. Because she's anemic.
It should do the opposite, right? Because
Some
like
people
low
say
iron.
like iron, so when they take it, they get like more tired. Because my daddy has like, in his blood, he has like more iron, so.
And it could be the fact that like it's boosting your metabolism, right? To a point where you're like burning a lot more energy, which eventually makes you tired. So it could be like that, maybe that sweet spot in the middle with iron. Okay, so red blood cells, here's a weird thing. Here's a eukaryotic cell that does not have a nucleus. They have evolved a way carrying the nucleus because the nucleus is a big heavy thing in the middle. And their main job, they want to carry oxygen. But then you can't replicate without having a nucleus. So they are produced in the bone marrow. So that's why when you're talking about bone cancers like leukemia are very dangerous because it interferes with your production of your red blood cells. 99% of your cells in your body who are responsible for efficiently breaking down all of the energy in your body. So there's this big metabolic effect when someone has leukemia. So again, donation of like plasma is really important because it will help people who are going through leukemia.
How many other blood cells other than white are there?
Well, and then we'll talk, we're gonna get to that. Check this out. Every 4 months, they live 4 months. Every second, 2 million die and are replaced. Every second. That's kind of bonkers, right? Like, yeah. So again, if this many are being replaced every second, people who have leukemia, that's another big problem.
So when they die, they just like filtered out with the waste?
They get filtered out by, they get broken down, and then you have a whole process where you have things like your liver, your kidneys, your spleen. They help to get rid of those dead ones. Yeah. So that and that gets into like other issues of other malfunctions of organs and cancers, that when you have this system happening and then the filtration systems break down, like diabetes, for example, in the kidneys, and the kidneys are a filtration system for your blood, that can be very dangerous to everything else, right? There's always a chain effect, or generally a chain effect when we have diseases or issues in our body.
I have 2 questions. So then, like, if our body's getting rid of 2 million, why are we peeing in blood or anything like that?
Because the cells get broken down first.
Oh, okay. And then
Yeah.
the second question is, why does the blood appear blue from the veins?
So it's what has Judy told me? It's not oxygen or deoxygenated. I think it's something with the walls of the arteries. But I have to, because I'm not going to answer that because I can't remember the correct answer on it. But I will look it up during lab if I remember. Otherwise, remind me. When someone has sickle cell anemia, their red blood cells are misshapen into like pointy ends. So remember I talked about how like round things go through round holes. It's like a nice complement evolutionarily, and we learned that when we're little kids in that little box game that we have with the shapes, you put them in. So these don't fit so well through the round red blood vessels, through the round tubes. And so what happens is that the points get stuck, especially places where you have bends, like joints. And so people who have sickle cell anemia, there's a few things that are compromised, as the ability to carry oxygen on the cells is more limited. In addition, these points are destructive. Because even though they're kind of like, the cells are soft, they still will get stuck in the twists and turns, especially in the capillaries, where they're only 1 cell thick. So people get a lot of joint pain, also blood flow issues, also breaking of blood vessels, which can lead to clots that travel around the body and can produce heart attacks or strokes. So just from one misshapen blood cell in the body can lead to chronic issues. Is that what you did?
Yeah, that's an accident cause blood
Yeah.
clots.
All right, so the second kind of blood cell are the white blood cells. There's not just one kind. There's all kinds of blood cells. Some of them are known as leukocytes, but there's different kinds that do different functions. We'll get into this a little bit more when we get into the immune system, but our immune system is super complex. Here's a white blood cell that is battling bacteria cells. Isn't that cool?
How did they?
Right? How do they? Amazing. It's some of you will take a whole semester-long class on the immune system, and even that you'll get to that class and they'll say, oh, there's even more. It's amazing. All right, so whenever a white blood cell, so the white blood cell their general jobs are to protect us from anything that is not a self cell. So they can protect you from, like a virus particle or bacteria or dust, right? If you go somewhere, my husband is working on our bedroom and there's a lot of dust. And so I'll just be sitting there, like yesterday I'm working at home and I sneezed so much yesterday because there's a lot of dust particles floating. And so my immune system is protecting me from getting those dust particles into my lungs. And the response is to sneeze. And so it could be something as just totally benign as a little piece of dust. But your body doesn't know, is it a piece of dust or is it a virus particle? So it's like, I'm gonna shoot that thing out, sneeze, cough.
Are they the reason why too, like in organ transplants, like organs will get rejected, like because they see them as not being the same cells that?
Yes, absolutely. Organ transplants are very specific. And certain organs are more specific than other ones. And we're going to get to that when we talk about the immune system. But yeah, an organ from somebody else is not seen as your own self. And we do things, there's mechanisms to kind of trick them a little bit. And then there's also a lot of planning genetically as well. Okay, there's another kind of cell. Platelets are not a cell, but they're little pieces of a bigger cell called a megakaryocyte. So platelet is not a cell. It's a piece of a megakaryocyte. The megakaryocyte pitches off these little platelets into the bloodstream. Isn't that interesting? All right, so platelets, what they do is platelets are kind of like bouncing around in the blood vessels, and they're looking for, anytime you have a tear in a blood vessel, an uneven surface. So the surfaces are real smooth. And so if they see an uneven thing, they stick to that, and then they shoot out this stuff called fibrin. They're like the spider people of the blood world. Fibrin is a protein that makes a spider web, essentially, kind of spider webby, and that captures blood cells to that area. And then once it captures enough there, it contracts. And it sticks itself, its contracted part, against the uneven surface to try and heal it. And then sometimes, so we call that a clot when you have a bunch of blood cells that are caught by fibrin together in an area to try and heal an uneven surface. And sometimes that clot can dislodge, can come off, and then it floats through the bloodstream. And clots are dangerous because sometimes they can go to the brain and cause a stroke, or the heart and cause a heart attack.
So blood clots don't always mean something bad happened, because this is obviously it was trying to be good, and then it ended.
Blood clots are good things, yes. They're intentionally good, and then sometimes it just makes something bad, right?
Would
Just
you-
like
would a blood thinner just easily fix it, or is it bad?
blood thinners are going to actually thin the blood of the water in the plasma and make the blood thicker. So blood thinners are kind of not necessarily the best solution to problems either, because they can unintentionally cause blood clots. Yeah.
Blood clots can be bad if they're not supposed to happen. There are actually some you know how from different species of snakes, they're different different venoms and different properties, and there's some snakes that viper venom causes tissue damage, venom from black mambas attacks your nervous system, and then there's some species that have venom that actually makes your blood induces unhealthy amounts of blood clotting, and that can kill you. So blood clotting it can be bad.
Right, yeah, for sure.
Isn't it it makes, this is a question for you.
Oh, there's a question.
Doesn't it
Oh, sorry, I thought you said there was a question.
create an actual ball or something?
Yeah, if you're bitten, it makes your blood clot in your arteries, kind of block up your system.
I'm gonna hypothesize that it probably makes the platelets produce fibrin, it has a good contact to the platelets, and then the platelets start shooting out the fibrin, which causes the clotting. I'm just my hypothesis.
Venom is really strange. Venom, what it actually is, it's actually just evolved saliva. It's actually it's I think it's a special evolved saliva. And it just actually, it is produced saliva. It can be endlessly produced out of venom ducts.
Right. Yeah.
Snakes just they have an endless supply, but their body just keeps producing it.
Poisonous saliva. Great. So let me just cover this. There's a negative feedback system, and when we talk about negative feedback, it means that there's one cell that tells this to do something. So this cell releases something, like a hormone could be, for example, and the hormone goes through the bloodstream and it contacts this thing, and that hormone makes this next cell, tissue, gland do something and release maybe another hormone, and then that hormone travels through the bloodstream and it makes another thing release another hormone or something else, and then that travels through the bloodstream. And so you have these chain effects that happen. And when you get through the whole chain, it could be 30 players 30 different kinds of cells within your body. Bam, 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 bam. And the last one produces something that goes through the body, and it goes back to the first one, and it tells the first one, we're good. That whole chain of events made me do the thing that I needed to do, and it tells the first one to stop. And that's what we mean by negative feedback, that when we have these long metabolic chains, the last one tells the first one to stop. When it's positive feedback, you go bam, 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 and the last one tells the first one, I'm not done, do it again, and you go through again, and do it again. Positive feedback's not very common. The biggest, most prominent example in our lives is childbirth. That's why childbirth takes often 1 to 2 days after water breaks, or even getting up to water breaking, is that these feedback chains are going, going, going. That's why they call it labor, because it's hard work. Your body is doing a lot of work. Okay, so to regulate our red blood cell numbers, we have a negative feedback. So we go through this whole chain of events, and the last one tells the first one, we've got enough red blood cells, let's stop production for now. And so the number of red blood cells, remember erythrocytes are another name for red blood cell. Remember, they determine how much oxygen is carried in the body, and this negative feedback involves a hormone called erythropoietin. Erythropoietin. Erythropoietin is produced by the kidneys. So kidneys do something to help regulate the amount of red blood cells in your body, because the kidneys are filtering your blood, and in the filtering of your blood, they're kind of like counting the number of red blood cells that pass through every minute and seeing, do you have enough red blood cells? And if you do not have enough red blood cells that are counted by the kidney releases erythropoietin, and eventually the erythropoietin contacts the bone marrow, where the red blood cells are produced, and in a chain, something contacts something, that erythropoietin stimulates this chain of events to tell the bone marrow produce more red blood cells. Because we have a low number, we're not carrying enough oxygen. When your oxygen level is totally good, it's restored, your erythropoietin levels in your body are low. So when you have a normal number of red blood cells, erythropoietin is low. Erythropoietin is naturally produced by the kidneys. So scientists and athletes were like, wait, so if I inject erythropoietin into me, I can get extra red blood cells to carry more oxygen, which will make my athletic prowess, my ability to perform athletically better. So people would inject erythropoietin as like a drug to cheat in events. If you know anything about the Tour de France, Lance Armstrong finally got busted for this, because he just kept winning and winning and winning, and everybody's like, he is just genetically amazing. No, he just did this. And eventually they figured it out.
So, what are like the risks of like what bad effects can you get from doing that?
I am not sure what the negative effects are. That is a really good question.
Because there are some pretty just do that to do it for fun.
Right, but some people, people who have heart issues will take it, especially if you're in heart failure and your heart's not pumping enough. They get erythropoietin supplements to produce more red blood cells, because their heart's not beating the oxygen around the body enough.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But I think for the most part, if you're just like, a regular old person, you don't really have a need for more. So that's never become a thing.
Do they use it in any like leukemia treatments?
I would hypothetically say yes, but I'm not sure.
Do you think like a side effect would be like not being able to produce it normally anymore?
Perhaps.
No, because you get negative feedback that you're doing it.
Just get
Right,
so
maybe.
used to
Could be, yeah, I'm not sure. So this is really a simplified version of it, that if your oxygen is low in your body, erythropoietin is produced by the kidneys, because your kidneys are counting kind of like the red blood cells that pass through it. And then that erythropoietin goes through the blood, eventually in a chain of events to tell the bone marrow, let's produce more red blood cells. And if you have more red blood cells, that's gonna up your oxygen levels to normal levels. Once your oxygen levels are normal, meaning that your kidneys are like, hey, all right, we're good. When you have enough oxygen, there's also in this chain of events, there's something released in the chain of events, probably by the bone marrow, probably releases something that tells the kidneys, we're good. So negative feedback means it goes around once and it stops. So this is the way, they call it blood doping. Erythropoietin, higher amounts of oxygen is doping your blood. But it's always been, again, because it's naturally made in your body by the kidneys, it's really hard to track this. So let's continue on with the circulatory system. We are going to finish up the circulatory system today, and then we will get into the lymphatic system. The circulatory system has 3 basic types of blood vessels. You've got red ones, they're not necessarily red when I never looked at them. Red, respiratory, red carrying oxygenated blood, blue carrying deoxygenated blood. Okay, so arteries, remember that arteries take blood away from the heart. They're taking oxygenated blood often, but not always. The smaller branches of arteries are called arterioles. It's nice, you got arteries, arterioles away from the heart.
So arterioles are just small arteries?
Yes, they are smaller branches from the arteries, correct. The arteries have larger amounts of muscle layers around them. So one of the things that I want to emphasize about our body system is that oftentimes when we think of like muscles, right? Muscles just don't mean like the big structures that hang off your skeleton. Muscles are very, very small. They often line most of your organs in your body to help your organs do their functions. So, like arteries here, see this layer right here? It's a muscle layer. Yeah. Veins have a smaller one, but arteries have a very thick muscle layer. And thinking about how the heart will pump, and then it's going to take oxygenated blood away from the heart, going to your head, out to your arms, to the trunk of the body, and then all the way down to the tips of your toes. That it wouldn't be realistic that the heart, even though the heart's a very strong muscle, that one pump would be able to push blood all the way to all these places. It has assistance in that pumping by these muscle layers that are also helping to squish and pump the blood throughout the body.
So does that make it harder or easier for the blood that's in the artery to distribute the oxygen that is carried?
Makes it easier to get to. So it's a good question, is that when you have these arteries, you have these arteries, and then it will push the blood to the arterioles, which will then push the blood to the capillaries, and that's where it's getting in contact with every cell. So this large layer in your big arteries is like helping to assist to get it to smaller branches, to the individual teeny branches, the capillaries, that are getting that diffusion of all of the things inside of the blood into the cells, and then the veins are getting it out of the cells. Veins, smaller branches called venules. Veins bring blood to the heart. They don't have as much muscle, but they are assisted by valves inside. So here, like the valves of the heart, like the AV valve and the semilunar valves, you have these little valves, and remember, valves keep things moving in the right direction, prevent things from backflowing, going backward. So what is happening here is as the arteries are getting blood out to the body and the veins are returning it back to the heart, these valves will do that and help to push. And so because of these valves, you don't have as much of a muscle layer on the veins. In the middle, between arteries, arterioles, veins, venules, you have the little tiny individual blood vessels, little small, 1 cell thick blood vessels called capillaries. This is where the arteries and veins eventually kind of meet in the middle. The capillaries look transparent, they're so thin. The reason being that they are so thin is that they facilitate the diffusion of so many substances. They are going to facilitate tiny little oxygen, tiny little carbon dioxides across, water, always across, other ions, hormones, things that are much smaller are going to be able to easily diffuse across the capillaries because they have very thin walls. The gases are so small in comparison to, like, thinking about organs. This is such a great picture because it shows you how the red blood cells flow through here. And the walls are almost transparent because they are so thin. Okay, issues of the heart diseases. Hypertension. Hypertension is just a fancy way of saying high blood pressure. Means your systolic and diastolic numbers are elevated. These numbers are elevated because your arteries and especially your arterioles are constricted. Constricted means they're tightening up. They're stressed out, right? When you think about when you did the ECG and I said, make yourself stressed out, and what did you do? You tightened things, right? And when you tightened up your muscles and you got really stressed out, you can tell everything's tightening up, right? And so that's the same thing down to your arterial level, is that when you have stress, the arterioles also are tightening up. You still have the same amount of blood flowing through your body though, right? So if you have a volume of blood that's normally flowing through here and now you tighten it and you have the same volume of blood pushing on a smaller area, is that going to produce additional stress on your blood vessels? It's like if you're moving, let's say we had a king-size mattress, we had to get it through this doorway, and it was taller than that doorway. Are we gonna have to kind of bend the mattress and push it through the doorway, force it a bit? That's like the volume of blood when you have hypertension and everything is stressed and constricted. It's like pushing something larger than a doorway through. Might it damage the doorway and the mattress? It might, right? Like you gotta like really figure out how to put something larger through something smaller, and that stress of push, push, push can cause damage to your blood vessels. This also is going to make the heart work harder. Right? If we're moving that king-size mattress through this doorway and it doesn't quite fit, is it going to cause us to work harder? Yeah. So the heart's got to pump even harder, and that's what produces that, again, a more tightening in your whole body. When you work out your muscles, they get bigger. So when your heart is being overworked, it is a muscle and it's going to get bigger. This is not a muscle that you want to make bigger. You want your heart to be a normal size. Because when the heart gets bigger, it can cause angina or strain. People will literally have heart aches. They'll be like, oh, when they have hypertension. When you have high hypertension over time, they can have like pain in their heart. Often because the heart's not getting enough oxygen, and it hurts when you don't have enough oxygen to the heart. Here's a double whammy. When you have hypertension, it can also accelerate another heart disease called atherosclerosis, or hardening of your arteries. So if you are stressing them, right, they're stressed out already, and then they're starting to get harder, they're not going to do a good job because they're stressed and they're not as pliable to push, push, push.
I have a question. So high blood pressure can it lead to a heart attack?
Yeah, because it can cause atherosclerosis, and or if your heart's not getting enough oxygen. So we have two issues here that, yes. Yeah.
Do you have any idea how like the stroke come when someone have a high like blood pressure?
High blood pressure, what's the outcome of it?
No, I know the outcome of it is stroke, but why is
Well,
it?
we'll get to that too. One of the many, it can be, yes.
Yeah.
We're gonna get to all of the issues. Yeah, stroke being one. So eventually over time, like I said, that doorway, if we're pushing that king-size bed through the smaller doorway, we might damage the doorway. It's kind of like pushing that volume of blood over and over again through your blood vessels. Eventually they might break. There might be damage to them. So what's going to happen is that if you have uneven surfaces of your blood vessels, if it tears a little bit, platelets are going to come and stick to that area. They're going to shoot out that fibrin. The fibrin is going to collect blood cells, try to heal that area, but it's going to cause a clot. And the more, clots, again, from last time we talked, are good because it's going to bring the blood cells to help heal that. But if you keep having clots, and especially if you have hypertension, here's kind of like the thing to think about, is that if you have a blood vessel and it opens up and you get a clot here, and your blood is being pushed hard, there's more pressure, right? Like a pressure washer pushing your blood through the blood vessels. Might that increase the ability of clots to dislodge? Yes. So clot can form here, and if it's being forced harder than normal, it can move. And when you have clots moving around the body, they can stop up important things. And that's where you get to stroke.
So is that how like someone could have a blood clot in their leg and then it moves up to like their lungs?
Yeah. Yeah. Some people, there's no good reason for why they have hypertension. Most likely it's genetic. They have some kind of mutation that doesn't serve them well, and it leads to hypertension. Okay, but there's other things that can lead to hypertension, like when you gain a lot of weight, that puts a lot more stress on your blood vessels. So weight loss is a solution. Stress management. That's a tough one, right? For everybody, that's a tough one. We've talked about that before. Reduction in salt. You gotta watch your salt. Salt is a preservative. So even if you're looking at like a granola bar, and you're like, I'm gonna grab these granola bars, and you have, remember I talk about looking at your family history, if you know your family history, and if there's hypertension, you should be looking at the labels of everything you eat and start adding up the salt and make sure you have the right amount of salt and not too much. Salt's really, really important for the functioning of specifically the muscles in your body, but too much salt can cause damage. Not enough salt can cause damage. So watch your salt content, especially if you're grabbing a lot of packaged foods. Especially if you eat out a lot. Fast food tastes good because they put a lot of salt in it. Salt and sugar. Salt and sugar make things taste better. So they'll stick a whole bunch of it in there. One of the things about quality food, you go somewhere, you have like, you pay more because you know it's coming from a local farm. You know you're getting a lot of fresh fruits and vegetables in there. It's quality, well-treated animals, all of those things. If you get quality food, they're not going to use a lot of salt in it because the taste of the food is what you are paying for. But you go to McDonald's and you get a cheap meal, what they have done is they've put a whole bunch of salt in there, maybe a bunch of sugar in there, and those two things can make cheap food taste much better quicker.
It's not cheap anymore.
No, right, well, nothing's cheap anymore, right? Fats, they'll put a lot of cheap fat in there. Saturated fat, they'll stick cheap saturated fat, and we'll talk about, eventually we'll get to all the different kinds of fats that can be bad for you. And then in addition, just everything is just cheap in there, but it's high amounts of bad stuff across the board. So reduction in salt, for if you have hypertension, eating fast food should be off your diet completely. And in general, you should really watch eating fast food. The other thing that fast food does is they put a lot of chemicals. There's labs that make chemicals, they put these chemicals in the food so that it tastes better. It's not the food that tastes good, it's the chemicals and the salt and the fats and the sugar in there. So it's not the actual food that tastes good. Also, a lot of these chemicals are kind of addicting. So that you're like, that taste is so good, right?
Like Priscilla's French fries.
Yeah, McDonald's French fries were one of the first things. They did this like chemical thing to them to make them taste good. It's like a lot of psychological stuff. So for severe cases, doctors will prescribe drugs to reduce hypertension. What those drugs do is they reduce the volume of water in your plasma. So what they're doing here, let's think about this, is that if you have, again, you have like, let's say 6 liters of blood, okay? So you got 6 liters of blood, and now we have a constriction, and what that constriction of all of the vessels in your body, let's say they can really just handle 5.5 liters of blood well, because everything's constricted, but you still have 6 liters of blood pushing, right? Causing stress. So now the doctor gives you a prescription to lower the amount of water in your blood, so it makes your blood a little thicker, so that it fits better through. So now it reduces your blood to 5.5 liters of blood, and it flows better, so it reduces the strain on your blood vessels, and hypothetically less damage, but is thicker blood better? No. So you got a lot of things that the plasma carries a lot of important stuff in there. And also just thicker blood. Does that sound like clotty to you? A little bit, right?
This is the same as the shots you give it to the patient when he's beginning of his stroke to avoid
Yes.
access stroke.
Yeah.
That's a shot.
Yes, people who are susceptible to stroke, it's a very similar thing. Yeah.
If you get hurt, then it'll be out faster.
Right.
Or do you think
You might, I don't know about bleeding out faster, but definitely you already, if you're bleeding out and you have less volume of blood, you're in
Yeah, that's what I mean.
trouble, yeah.
So you're saying like blood thinners will reduce the amount of water in your plasma, right?
Yeah.
Making the blood thicker?
Yeah.
But it's kind of confusing, because when I think of like blood thinners, then I think like the blood's like a lot thinner, not thicker.
A lot more watery.
That way, because like, I know like old people.
Oh,
have
that's a
big
different,
blood
well, that's a
thinners.
different thing, but yeah.
Okay.
So they're reducing the volume in your blood.
Okay,
That blood thinner is, yeah, a
okay,
little bit different thing.
okay.
That's not what they're doing with hypertension. They're actually doing a blood thicker.
Oh, okay.
Right. Okay, so some of the causes would be like stroke, for example. If you keep pushing, right, something can rupture. Specifically, stroke is a rupture of a blood vessel in the brain. Your brain is the control center and tells everything what to do. So if you get, let's say, just, like you get a rupture here, it might cut off the flow of blood to this whole area of the brain. Different areas of your brain control different things. So the result of a stroke will depend on where the rupture happens and what part of the brain is cut off from getting oxygen and nutrients and energy and getting all those waste products taken away. Okay, what causes stroke? So we're going to talk about atherosclerosis. Hypertension is in there. Embolism, like I said before, when you have a clot and it gets pushed and it travels somewhere else. That's what an embolism is. Microangiopathy, some people are born with what we call small artery disease. Hypertension, there it is. AVM, atriovenous malfunction, this is another genetic disorder. Cerebral aneurysms, an aneurysm. An aneurysm is the stretching of the blood vessels. And so, like I said before, when you have that pressure, right? And then eventually over time, that pressure can cause, and the blood vessel is going to respond not by rupturing right away, but it's going to stretch, and eventually, like a balloon, you can blow up a balloon so much before it pops. So usually what you'll see in the blood vessels is this. And so this is what we're talking about with like an aneurysm, is you can get the stretching and it'll stretch, and then eventually.
So wait, why does it stretch again?
Because the pressure, because you're putting the lower amount of blood volume going through the smaller blood vessels, right? Because they're constricted, it's gonna stretch out. Stretching tries to alleviate that a little bit.
So I know sometimes when people get a stroke or like a heart attack, first they get difficult breathing. But what's the cause of that?
Because there's not, if you're having issues with the heart not functioning, it's not pumping blood. And so if you're not getting the blood to and from the lungs, that means that your lungs can get cut off from the pumping of blood. So you're not getting as much oxygen. Yeah.
This was a heart stroke, right?
Yeah. Brain injuries can cause a stroke, head injuries, congenital artery defects, something that at birth, and prematurity. So a lot of things can cause a stroke. That's why you're seeing too, sports in general, even skateboarding, scootering, skiing, you're seeing a lot more helmet wearing when people are doing sports because they learned, oh, you hit your head and you could get a stroke. A lot of other issues when you hit your head, right? Concussion and so you gotta protect that brain, the control center. Atherosclerosis is hardening of the arteries. The walls of the arteries start to get thicker and thicker. Yeah.
And eventually, if it gets worse, then a person will require like a bypass surgery.
Yes. Yeah, and we're gonna get to that as well. So what happens is that if you're, again, so atherosclerosis, one of the things about it is that it could be genetic. And I know people, I know someone who he was about 5'6", 145 pounds, ran every day, was a marathoner, so definitely getting in his cardiovascular exercise, was vegan, didn't eat any animal products, was very textbook in terms of healthy, did everything right. He had a triple bypass surgery, had a heart attack. Why? Genetics. So sometimes there's just like out of your control. He did everything right. The rest of us who are susceptible, it is because you are eating too much, quote unquote, bad fat. When you're eating too much of those fats, mostly those are animal fats, what happens is that when we have, okay, so your diet, let's say that 2,000 calories is the level where you can consume and you don't gain any weight, meaning that that's enough for you to burn every day in your everyday functions, your body functioning and doing its things, plus you walking around and going to school, maybe exercising, all of those things. 2,000 calories is the perfect amount of calories. If you eat less than that, what happens is your body takes from fat stores in your body and you lose weight. If you eat more than that over time, let's say every day you eat about 2,100 calories. What happens in 36 days, approximately 3,600 calories, you will gain a pound of fat. Now, let's say when you eat 2,100 calories, that some of those calories are from animal fats or trans fats. And what your body does is your body's like, you metabolize of those 2,000 calories, your body will metabolize everything that it needs to keep you functioning, and anything beyond that, it's going to store it. And when it goes to store those extra fats, if they are animal fats or trans fats, your body looks at those and goes, I'm not sure what to do with those. And instead of putting them like on your butt or your gut, your body goes, I'm gonna stick them underneath the walls of your arteries. When you can metabolize them in a day, you eat that 2,000 calories, your body uses up that energy. But the extra energy, it will go, if it's those kind of quote unquote bad fats, and we'll get to what we call bad fat, it doesn't know what to do. So instead of putting it in the normal places, sticks it underneath the walls of your arteries.
Why do certain medications like antidepressants or birth control, why do those cause weight gain though? Even if you're eating 2,000 calories and burning it off or less?
It messes up your hormones. And your hormones are another thing that control the systems in your body. So it makes things, can make things go awry.
So even if you're eating a healthy diet and burning all your calories, you can still gain weight because of those hormones?
And that gets into, sometimes medicines can cause your, what normally would be like your 2,000 calorie threshold for not gaining or losing. Sometimes it can make that go down. And so then while you're like, I normally, like this is my normal diet and I'm gaining weight, it's because something in your endocrine system, like kind of like hormonal control system, the messenger system in your body is like, messes this kind of normal, what we call our homeostasis, it messes the homeostasis up. And so then your body starts doing weird stuff. So here you can see some of those fats that are deposited underneath the wall of an artery. Over time, if those fats continue to accumulate and accumulate and accumulate, the fats can also get harder, more brittle and tough, and it can cause issues with the lining of your arteries to become hard and burst open. These are the coronary arteries. Remember, the coronary arteries are the ones on the heart. Okay, so plaques are composed of what we call low density lipoproteins. This is what we would call like the bad fats or the LDLs. They go low. They're bad. So over time, what happens is you can see here that if this is your muscle layer here, and this is the wall of the artery here in blue and red, that what's happening is that those LDL cholesterol is getting stuck underneath here. And then you could just get an accumulation, which is probably like a fatty core, and this can get brittle, and you can get ruptures. Now, the other thing too to recognize here is that if, and you can kind of see it on the picture, but it's giving you a side view. But if these fats are starting to accumulate, and over time accumulating, and they're pushing, the fats are starting to push into the blood flow area, it's going to do a very similar thing to what happens with hypertension. You're starting to block the flow of blood there. And so if these are starting to get into the area, right, you can see this is getting smaller and smaller, and you get a rupture here, that you get a blood clot. Now the blood clot, because this is pushing in, because all this fat is accumulating and these plaques are being made, that you can get a blockage. That clot, well, normally would be like if you had a little rupture here, the clot might be sticking just there, and then the blood's flowing around it, and the clot is working to heal this. But now, what if the clot forms there? Yeah, can do one of two things. You can see here how this clot is bigger than the area that the blood can flow, so it can make a blockage happen. The other thing too, remember that, let's say the clot does allow some blood flow, but already this is smaller, and you have a clot, so what's going to happen, the blood's going to be trying to push through that smaller area, and this could get dislodged. So a lot of these issues, the conceptual parts of them are very similar, even though what causes them is different. All right, high density lipoproteins are your quote unquote, your good cholesterol. Yeah, your good cholesterol is more of your plant stuff. So think about like plant oils, avocados, coconuts have some a little bit different. While coconut is good for you, you really want to limit the amount because of its composition. It acts a little bit more like a animal fat, even though it is a plant. But these are the ones that you want to go for because, so if you've ever seen some of those documentaries where someone says, I'm going to go on a totally vegetarian diet or vegan diet, and they end up lowering their cholesterol, their hypertension, etc. Focusing your diet on HDL cholesterol will literally start to solve a lot of your cardiovascular problems. Unless it's genetic, and then you have to worry about that. But one of my friends, they watched, and I can't remember the name of the film, but it was a couple that did a vegan diet for 6 months. And there was like so many great things in their health that came out of it. So they said, oh, one of the professors here, she was like, her and her husband she had hypertension, he had high cholesterol. So they said, let's do it. So they were like, well, let's do it for 6 months also, and we'll see what the outcomes are. And they talked to their doctors about it. And her husband, who was on a statin for his cholesterol, goes to the doctor, she tests his blood at the end of the 6 months, and she's like, whoa, hey, stop taking that. because he had lowered his cholesterol so much from the diet and was still taking the statin, his cholesterol level is actually too low. So he totally got off by being on a vegan diet, got off of his cholesterol medication. My friend, she got to half her hypertension medication. They both lost weight. They both felt better. They just were like, we feel better. So focusing your diet more on these plant type fats, staying away from fast food is so much better for you. Okay, the other thing that LDLs do is the LDL, or the bad cholesterol, in those areas will attract macrophages, types of white blood cells that are going to try and eat up the cholesterol, the LDL cholesterol. But what can happen is that in this area, so now if you're attracting a lot of blood cells here, white blood cells, you're also like puffing this out again more. And it's making this plaque area bigger. So even though your body's trying to take care of it, it's doing not a great thing, and in the, you know, the outcome of it isn't necessarily great. The muscle will try and cap this to prevent breakages from happening. So your body responds, but if you're going to add an extra cap over it, you're adding more space into an area that's already getting occluded, or you're starting to like encroach into that area. So a heart attack will happen when inside here gets brittle and the cap ruptures, and then you get a clot. So again, you've got like layer upon layer of issues that are happening, and you get a breakage in here, and then you can get a clot form, and it blocks the flow of blood. These happen on the coronary arteries, the ones that service the heart. Look at that.
Oh, that's gross.
Yeah,
That's amazing.
that's a real person's arterial or artery, coronary artery. Look at all that.
In the center, that's a blood clot.
That's a blood clot. So, you know, you can't even tell what is going on with this blood vessel,
It's
right?
like rust.
Because it's just so, does this black look healthy? No, right? And then this just looks disgusting. And then you've got this clot. Oh, it's just, doesn't that make your heart hurt?
Yeah.
Ooh, yeah. All right. Atherosclerosis is accelerated or promoted or increased by hypertension. Ooh, cigarette smoking. I talked about genetics. Obesity, diabetes, I can't talk, not exercising, and consuming the wrong kinds of food, getting high cholesterol.
How could it happen if it's genetics, but like you're burning all the fat and stuff?
It's a mystery that your body, anytime, like genetically, anytime you consume even like maybe some regular fat, I'm not sure the genetics behind, you know, doing the perfect things, and then you're still getting that fat under the walls of the artery. Yeah. Yeah, that's why I always tell people, like, try, and if you know your biological family, look at what you might have or succumb to in time, because those are the things that you really want to focus on. Like if diabetes runs in your family, you want to make sure that your consumption of large amounts of sugar in one sitting, that you don't do that. And you want to make sure in general that you're like not consuming a lot of sugars as well.
Are you talking type 2? Or?
Yeah, both. Because, I mean, type 1 is usually occurs in early childhood, and they still don't know exactly what causes it. They believe that like some of the hypotheses are that there's a genetic predisposition and that there is maybe a virus that the person encounters. And so maybe someone has a genetic predisposition and they never encounter that virus. And they never get a type 1 diabetes in that window of time in early childhood. There's so many mysteries. So that's like a thing if you're going into a medical career and you're thinking, I want to be a doctor or dentist or whatever. There's so much research. There are so many medical mysteries that need to be solved. It'd be like super exciting work to do. So things to think about. All of these things you can kind of limit by doing healthier stuff. Again, genetics.
Would vaping also fall into like those categories of like cigarette smoking, like all that stuff?
I am not, and that was, I'm not sure if vaping accelerates this. I would hypothetically think so. However, vaping is if any of you vape or your friends vape, you gotta get off of it. Kids are dying.
Yeah, they're fiends.
Fast. I'm not even like, I know it sounds like whatever. No, the one of the things it's like, it's kind of like a lipid that you're breathing in, and it coats the alveoli, the air sacs, and you literally cannot breathe. Can't breathe.
Yeah, remember when those kids started dying and stuff?
Yeah.
When vapes came out, oh my gosh, that's terrible.
Yeah, and it's marketed in a way that sucks you in. It looks cool, right?
I've never done drugs in my life, and I never will.
I hope so. My son says that too, and I'm like, oh, what's it? That moment of temptation.
My friend, she's like,
Treatments as drugs. One of the leading selling drugs in the world is Lipitor. It's a statin that helps to lower your cholesterol. Diet changes, losing weight, exercise, not eating fast food, etc. All right, so heart attack. A heart attack is called an AMI, oh my gosh, AMI or an MI, a myocardial infarction. If I've ever heard that term, like someone had an MI, they had a heart attack. Coronary arteries specifically are blocked. The ones that service the heart are blocked. If the heart, yeah.
What's like the difference between like the different kinds of cholesterol medication, like the rovastatin and rovastatin?
I am not sure what is the difference and why they might prescribe one over the other.
I think it's because some people requires less. Each medication is like, higher or
gotcha.
lower, and some people actually work in pharmacy.
Your pharmacist, right? So if the heart gets a blockage, that area of the heart is not getting oxygen to break down also its nutrients that it's not getting. It's not having things taken away from the heart as well. So the heart can't work. So some of the things, like if someone's having a heart attack, one of the best things to do is get them an aspirin and have them take an aspirin right away. Because what an aspirin does is it makes the blood thinner, meaning that it's going to put more water into the blood so that maybe some of the nutrients and energy and oxygen can flow through there and continue on. The other thing is administration of oxygen. So getting someone there to help. I mean, how many of you have like an oxygen tank, a spare oxygen tank in your house? Yeah. But you can't, so aspirin and getting medical help as quick as possible is really important. Okay, so let's say that they they'll look, like if you're somebody who's susceptible to heart attack, they will do things to look at the blockages in your heart. And if one is particularly bad, they can kind of try and cut it off early on so that you don't end up having a heart attack. And a few of the things that they will do, so here, for example, here's the artery that's got plaques on both sides. And they can do one of three things. So they can go in, and I believe they go in through the pelvis, maybe over here, and they lead this little tiny wire that has a drill on the end of it. They get it into the coronary artery and bzzz.
Is there another one they go from the leg or no?
I believe so, yeah.
I've heard it's from the leg.
Yeah. So amazing that they can lead that little wire, guide it all the way up to the heart and zzz, a little tiny, tiny drill. Okay, so they can drill that out. They can do the wire, and at the end of it, it's got a little clamp, and that clamp is holding this little thing here that is a Kevlar, like a wire mesh, a very strong wire mesh, and when it's like a spring. And so then they can get it up into that area, and then they let it go, and it opens it up, and it holds it open. And some of these little plaques get broken in the process. And then the other thing they can do is that the wire, again, there's a balloon on there. When it gets to that area, they pump the balloon up, and the balloon breaks, causes the plaques to break off.
I'm guessing like these can only be done if there's not a clot, because it seems like if they did
Right.
it would just send the clot.
Yes, it's preventative. It's like, oh, this is getting bad. So it's not, this is just showing that a clot would cause a heart attack. So no clot there, but they see this stuff happening. They can do these to try and prevent the clot from this situation from happening. Yeah, this is a little misleading.
If they put stents in,
That's a stent.
okay. Oh.
Yeah. That's, no, it's okay. Yeah, I know. So that's what a stent is these little mesh Kevlar.
So a stent is, like proactive, and then a triple bypass is like past the fact of having a heart attack, like
After.
After the fact, okay.
Yeah. So if someone has a heart attack and they have to have a bypass, what they do is they're going to go into the leg and the lower leg. They're going to take out a piece of vein. And then, so if this is where the blockages happen, it's totally, so this whole rest of the branch, which services, again, it's going to branch, smaller and smaller. If it's servicing this whole area, perhaps a whole ventricle, what they need to do is they need to bypass the clot. That's why it's called a bypass. Bypass means go beyond. So they take that vein and they go to an area beyond the clot and they sew it onto the coronary artery, and then they take that vein and they connect it up to the aorta. So now this branch gets its own little personal flow of blood. This is a single bypass. If you have, let's say now this branch also has one, they'll do a double, and this branch has one, they'll do a triple. If you have 4, they'll do a quadruple. My dad had quadruple. Yeah.
So, like that area of the artery that gets bypassed, does that just like die after, like since it's blocked and now it's bypassed?
It could if it's not bypassed.
Well, that's what I mean, like after
Oh,
it's
yeah.
bypassed, like that area that has the blockage, is that part just like die?
Like,
Right there.
oh, right here?
Yeah, it's at the.
I would assume it's as close to the blockage as possible. I mean, I don't, yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure how, I would, again, I hypothetically say that it would be probably like around here to prevent some of that, you mean this area right here?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would assume they're not gonna let a piece of it die. I don't know, but I'm not a heart surgeon.
So since it bypasses the clot, and the blood is, flowing down that coronary artery right there, right before you get to the clot, isn't there gonna be a bunch of blood that accumulates there that can't get past the clot, or wouldn't that cause a problem?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what happens like this branch here. I'm not sure what's going on over there. So like if this too, like this whole area from here to here, I'm not sure what happens there. Good questions, really good questions. You're all gonna learn this in medical school. The other danger is that what if you don't change your ways? What if you're just somebody who's like fast food junkie, right? And you're accumulating these plaques, LDL cholesterol, and then this, you get this blocked up. People can do that. They think there's a lot of people who go, I'm fixed. I don't have to change what I'm doing because I'm fixed. Yeah, you can't do that. All right, so on to the next bad news, heart failure. This is called dilated cardiomyopathy. Dilate means opening or bigger, stretching. That the heart muscle starts to stretch out, and it gets weaker as a result of it. It's too stretched out. Like if you have your favorite t-shirt, you have your favorite shirt, and you put it, like after 5 years of wearing it, and it used to be like this, and it over time gets stretched out, and to the point where you're like, I can't even wear this anymore. It's so like loose and big and thin. That's like your favorite piece of clothing over time. Is that over time, if you keep using it, washing it, it'll stretch out. And then guess what? When it stretches out, does it get thinner? And then you're like, it doesn't really function. That's like your heart. When people have heart failure. So if the heart is weak, it's not going to pump blood well. It's not pumping blood well. You're not getting enough oxygen out to the body. Here's the other thing, is that people who are undergoing heart failure, they also start to get water in their lungs. Which, now you've got a double thing going on here, right? Because you're not pumping enough oxygen out to the body, and the lungs, which are responsible for grabbing the oxygen to put into the blood, you don't have as much volume available because they're starting to fill up with water. So if your lungs are this big, and let's say this is not necessarily the way it works, but let's say that this much is filled with water, right? Like this much is filled with water, now you're only left with this amount of lungs to get oxygen into the body.
Would you be able to feel the water in your lungs, or would it just be
It causes coughing, and it causes a few things, like coughing, wheezing. Like even people who have heart failure, even simple things like getting up and walking to the restroom can cause them to go, to be out of breath, because they just don't have as much volume in their lungs anymore. It's like basically like you're drowning inside of your body.
Like dry drowning?
Yeah, dry drowning. All right, so it is common, it happens in both biological sexes. It can happen to people of all ages. Mostly we're seeing it in middle-aged men. What causes it? A lot of alcoholics end up developing heart failure.
Does that go for heart attacks too? Like I know men are more prone to heart attacks. Is it the same contributing factors?
Different contributing factors, but could hypothetically be that maybe men don't take as good care of themselves. Drug use, especially cocaine and meth, will accelerate this or cause this. Infections like rheumatic fever can cause this. 400,000 people per year have heart failure, 25,000 deaths a year. All these heart issues this isn't the big one, right? So the big one is atherosclerosis. So we hear about that a lot more, but this is a pretty big problem too. So again, right, shortness of breath. You could just be sitting there taking notes and it causes you like you've been exercising. Eventually it gets worse, the symptoms get worse and worse and worse.
Smoking can cause it too, no?
Smoking, I'm not sure, but I know it's like alcohol and drug use are the big ones. Sometimes it's genetic, that people are more susceptible to it.
It's one genetic too.
I'm sorry?
Heart failure.
Yeah, it can be a genetic issue too, yeah. Okay, so here's the other thing, is that your kidneys are noticing that you don't have enough oxygen in your body, so your kidneys will produce more erythropoietin. So here's one good thing, like the blood doping we talked about in athletes, they will do that same method as a treatment for people in heart failure. They'll give them erythropoietin. And remember, the erythropoietin from the kidneys is going to go through the blood and tell the bone marrow to make more red blood cells. So they try and get them to produce more red blood cells to carry more oxygen. So what's the cure? Gotta have a heart transplant. 2,200 are performed per year. 25,000 deaths. Not enough hearts going around. You're gonna get a heart transplant, you're waiting for someone else to die. Now, not only that,
They're gonna have the same surface markers? and
Yes.
the same blood type?
yes. And the thing about the heart transplant is that surface markers, basically the identifiers that say, I'm a heart cell and I'm a heart cell in me, they have to be really close. So let's say that, I don't know, I die and one of you needs a heart. I can't just like will it to you. I'd love to if I gave, you had heart failure, just here's my heart, I'm gonna die, here's my heart. But it's not that easy, is that they have to match up, and we'll talk about MHCs, major histocompatibility complexes. They're little surface markers that identify us on our cells. And so they have to be really, really close with hearts. Hearts are very picky, and that's why this is very difficult.
What's the truth, or like, what's the science behind, like, after people receive transplants, that they have, like, different, like, memories, or they possess, like, cause I don't even know, like, is that, like, true or not?
I mean, I don't know, and that's a good, that gets into like supernatural, right? It's almost like unexplainable, but yeah, some people, will get a heart and then they just start having like, and sometimes the families will keep in contact. It depends on how they want it. The grieving family, that's tough. It's a beautiful thing that a family might choose to donate organs of their loved one who died, but it can be very painful, right? Because you've lost a loved one. So sometimes they're open to keeping in contact with the person who has the heart. It has to go both ways, and I think there's a lot of legal things going on there. But sometimes like someone will get a heart from someone and they get in contact with the person's family that died, and they tell the family memories of the person that they got the heart from.
Oh,
And the family's like, wait, what? I don't know.
says that it must be the same size too.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
That's weird.
Yeah, so like if it's a child, for example, undergoing heart failure, they can't get a heart from
So
me.
it's good, like, we having the same feeling too when he gets his heart transplant, like have the same feeling as the person who died.
Kidneys are a little bit easier in terms of matching. Is that what you're talking about, or you're talking about the memories?
About the numbers.
Oh, I don't know.
That's kind of funny though.
Yeah, it's interesting, fascinating, it's
It
supernatural.
doesn't like it doesn't really sound logical because it's not like you're having someone else's like brain, like it's a muscle,
Right.
it's a muscle. I can get memories.
Right.
Doesn't
I don't
sound
know, but
logical
it's
at all.
fascinating.
I wonder if like the person that they got the heart from, like say they were like really good at cardio. I wonder if the person who just received the heart, I wonder if they then become like really good at cardio.
Yeah, interesting,
They
right?
pick up, like, I think they pick up bad habits too, like from the old person, sometimes they can pick up bad habits. It's kind
Yeah.
of.
Another
I don't
weird,
ever figure out why,
right,
like, how would you even figure that out? You don't even know where to start.
right.
It's, yeah.
There you go.
You wanna say
There's you're gonna get your MD, PhD at the same time and work on people with heart failure and figure out this mysterious memory thing. Okay, so there's a pretty good, like once a person gets a heart, it's a pretty good, like they get a match and everything works out well. They're doing well. A lot of, like half are still alive 10 years later. There's stories about people who get a heart and then they start marathoning from heart failure. So they're, that they just go like, I'm so good, and then they like are able to do marathons and they never did a marathon before. Okay, so the lymphatic system. We're gonna get through this one chapter today. The lymphatic system works very closely with the circulatory system. One of the things about our blood system is that we are constantly in the benefit of diffusion, but also there are cases where maybe diffusion is like, ooh, wait, diffusion means things, molecules moving from high concentration to an area of less concentration to low concentration. So like in the blood, when the arteries and the arterioles are pumping the blood out to the rest of the body, there's a high concentration of oxygen. Your cells are constantly working, so they're constantly using oxygen. So your cells are a low concentration. So in the arteries, you have high concentration, and just kind of like natural phenomenon, the oxygen moves out, diffuses into the cells, from the blood to the cells. Water also does that constantly too. So what that means is that if we have a lot of water, especially in our circulatory system and the plasma, that water is moving from the circulatory system out. Not always right into the cells, but there's also these little extracellular areas called interstitial tissue sometimes, or both, I guess both. So you're constantly losing water from the circulatory system, but water is valuable. We gotta get it back. Get it back into the circulatory system. So that's why you have a lymphatic system, is you have this really amazing evolution of, here's circulatory vessels, and then around them are the lymphatic vessels. So as the circulatory system loses things through diffusion, the lymphatic system is there to kind of suck it back up and then bring it back into the circulatory system. Okay, so lymphatic system, it's a network of vessels. Go from big to small to small to small. We also have lymph nodes. You go to the doctor and you get a checkup, especially if you're sick, what do? They do this, right? You've got a lot of lymph nodes, and we'll get to those in a minute. You have lymphocyte-rich tissues, like the tonsils, for example. And the thymus and the spleen are part of the lymphatic system. So wherever you have circulatory system, you have lymphatic system. It goes all through the body. One thing I want to point out is that those lymph nodes, right, they're gonna feel all around here when you're sick. That's because anywhere you have a port, I like to say a portal, an opening to the outside world. In your body, your mouth, your nose, your ears, your eyes can get stuff in them. Your urogenital system has openings. Anywhere where you sweat a lot, your armpits, right? They're opening, the pores are opening to release sweat. We have a lot more here. Anywhere where you sweat a lot, your chest, the core of your body, the trunk of your body. So wherever you have those portals, you're going to have a lot more of these nodes. Because our head has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you've got a lot of lymph nodes in your head, and especially because your head has a lot of brain area. Up here, you have a lot in your neck.
Some people have the twins in them.
Yeah, I mean, we have them everywhere. We have lymph nodes everywhere. but just more like where you might have some more in your palm where you sweat more because the pores can open. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about the functions of the lymphatic system. So one, as I mentioned, return the fluids back to the circulatory system. Diffusion cause leaks, water, other nutrients in your body. Diffusion, great, but has its downfalls. So we're going to focus on this first one. We'll go through all four. Okay, so the network of blood capillaries, next to it has a network of lymph capillaries. And then those lymph capillaries get bigger into kind of like, you know how you have the arteries and the venules, it's kind of like that, a little bit bigger ones, and then you have the bigger ones. So they go from really, really microscopic to bigger, not that big. I'm exaggerating. The lymph capillaries are very similar to the circulatory capillaries because they have to have very thin walls to be able to facilitate the diffusion of microscopic, teeny, weeny atoms and molecules. Okay. They also have one-way valves, so they push the water back in the direction that's eventually going to go into the circulatory system. I love these valves, right? Push down right. If we didn't have this, if we did not have a lymphatic system, what we call dead ends, fingers, like your nose, your toes, they'd get huge. They blow up like balloons and explode eventually from stuff that would accumulate. So the lymphatic system is really important to keep working. Eventually get, like I said, those larger lymph vessels. As they get larger, they get a little bit more, they have the valves, but then they need a little bit more muscle there. So the larger ones have muscle to keep pushing the water in the right direction. And so here, like the green, I mean, it's not green in your body, but just to show you kind of the differences, is that where you have capillaries in the body, you're going to have lymphatic capillaries also, right next to those. So that as the diffusion of water, boop, 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 you're gonna look at all the openings that are going to allow water to get in there.
No blood, right?
No, the blood will stay. The blood cells will stay. Yeah. Okay, so what are some downfalls of your lymphatic system not working correctly? This is called elephantiasis. Elephantiasis. A lot of times people call it elephantitis. Elephantiasis. Elephantitis is caused by a roundworm, a nematode, that's a parasite. The parasite gets into the body, and then it makes a little home in the lymph vessels. And it just sits there and it scars them up so that they can't work appropriately. And then there you go. Remember how I said the water will accumulate? And some of the lymph vessels are still working, but enough of them are scarred up with these nematodes, these roundworms, that the water gets stuck. This roundworm is called Wuchereria bancrofti. There's a couple other species of Wuchereria that also can cause elephantiasis. How does the roundworm get into the body? You're bitten by a mosquito. Very similar to the way malaria is transmitted, is that the mosquito stings you, and as it's stinging you and drinking your blood, those little roundworms are slipping in. off the stinger, the proboscis. Kind of like what? It's a bacterial, Lyme disease is a bacterial, but it's a tick that bites you that gives you the bacterial infection.
Yeah, when like you're stuck with this like condition.
Yes, yes. So a lot of students say, well, how do you solve it? How do you cure this? So they use, because the round ones are very small, they use chemotherapy. Chemotherapy targets any quick growing cells in your body. So the worms are quick growing, so the chemotherapy can target them.
Is there any like surgeries you can go for?
They're so small that, yeah, we're looking at like a really microscopic level. And there's often a lot of them, a lot of these roundworms in one person. They multiply quickly. So chemotherapy is a good solution because it will target those quick growing worms in your body. In a lot of countries where you're more susceptible to this, there's not good health care. So they can't get the treatment that they need. Look at this, they even can like cause little swellings, nodes.
So after receiving the chemotherapy, like the worms like out of the body, would they go back to normal, or are they still stuck with?
I'm sure there's a lot of scarring that stays, right? You're not gonna go back to, like your nice smooth skin. Like this person, for example, it's got a lot of issues going on with the skin, right? Because it's getting stretched, and especially if these nodes are forming.
Would that mess with the blood vessels as well?
Possibly too. And chemo mostly targets things that really grow fast, so like your hair grows really, it's not like your hair's flowing out of your head, but it's a faster growing cell. So hair, eyebrows, eyelashes, anything that's kind of hair-like. The other cells in your body that are replaced quickly, digestive system cells. So that's why chemotherapy, people will lose their hair, but they also have a lot of really bad digestive system issues because they're losing the lining, which means they're losing cells that do the functioning of the digestive system. And many people lose weight when they're on chemotherapy. Chemotherapy it's poison. You're poisoning your body. So it's rough. It usually takes about a 2-year course, 2 years of chemo to cure this. So it takes a long time to target every single one of those worms to get it out. It's expensive, and it's 2 years of chemo, you gotta survive that. You gotta survive being poisoned for 2 years. Yeah, so it's tough. All right, other functions of the lymphatic system. Number 2 is to transport fats. From your small intestine, fats are released and they go into larger lymphatic vessels. The lymphatic vessels bring them to the vena cavas, which go right into your heart. So lymphatic capillaries, eventually they'll release the fats. So the small intestine releases the fats into the interstitial areas, the space around cells, and then the lymphatic vessels will, from that interstitial area, the fluid area, they'll grab those fats and then transport them up to your vena cavas. So fats, you eat, next time you go for fast food or a big fatty meal, you eat some French fries, think about that. Fats going right boom into your heart. Hence why the circulatory vessels around your heart, the coronaries, get targeted by fats, in addition to the body not knowing what to do with them. So now maybe you can visualize a French fry going right into your heart. Next time you eat a cheeseburger, going right in there. We're almost done. function 3, the lymphatic system works with the immune system. Those lymph vessels, the lymph nodes are going to produce lymphocytes, white blood cells, and we'll get into the immune system sooner than later. So bacteria and viruses, the lymphatic system is assisting the immune system in defending us against anybody that doesn't belong. All right, so lymphocytes, lymph nodes, lymphatic system, all these things are extremely connected. Okay, so you have a lot more lymphocytes, like I said, anywhere you have a portal to the outside world, anywhere you have an opening, you're going to have a lot more lymph nodes. Respiratory system, digestive system, urinary system. Where do your respiratory and digestive systems start? Right here. Lymphocytes are produced in the thymus also, and then the spleen is a filter that have a lot of macrophages, an eater kind of white blood cell, and lymphocytes, and so those kind of cells can sit there in the filter of the spleen and eat up the bad stuff. You also have macrophages, the big eaters, and your lymph nodes. So when you have something that affects your lymphatic system, your lymph nodes, which include your tonsils, you can get tonsillitis or mumps. Tonsillitis, how many of you have had tonsillitis? Anybody? No, okay. Anybody have their tonsils out? Okay, yeah. So what happens with the tonsils is that it could be a virus that causes you to have tonsillitis. If it's a bacterial infection, which is a streptococcus, a kind of thing that gives you strep throat. So like I used to get, as you know, like your age, I used to have chronic all through high school. All of a sudden, strep throat, strep throat, strep throat. And then eventually, I think it was my junior year of high school, I got my tonsils out because they were getting so big that I was having a hard time breathing.
You have a bunch of craters all over.
Yeah, and they can develop pustules. And what happens with the streptococcus is they can form when you have those chronic, because you have like chronic issues, like sore throats a lot. You don't remember? Good, well that's good. Did you have a lot of pain over and over and over again? Yeah, a lot of sickness. The streptococcus can form a biofilm on your tonsils, which means that they go into basically like a thick bubble and you can't get rid of them. And that's why someone who has this kind of strep bacteria, and if it can form that biofilm, if it's the species, or not species, it's a strain that can form a biofilm, that's why they'll get this chronic over and over and over again. Yeah, one of the professors here, her son is having his tonsils out tomorrow because he's like, food is getting stuck behind his tonsils and he's gagging. He's like, was like, one day, said it was like crazy that there was a piece of food, they had to go to the emergency room because she couldn't get it out, and he was like, because the reaction of your body is to get anything beyond the back of your mouth out. And so he was like, he was having a hard time breathing because of this, and she said it was really scary, but his tonsils were enormous, yeah. So he's been having a lot of issues, and he's been wheezing a lot.
I want to ask, what do we eat something called?
So they say things like cold or hot. It just eases it. It freezes freezes the inflamed tissue cold so that you don't feel the pain. Hot will do the same thing. It'll give you that soothing. They both soothe in different ways. They're both good. Yeah. Okay, last one is to filter the blood of gross stuff, waste products, dead blood cells. Remember all those red blood cells that are dying? 4 million a minute? You gotta filter those out.